Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of the ATACS podcast. We are adults, we talk about cool stuff, and today we are here to talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I am your host today. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Joining me, we have a whole crew to discuss the middle chapter of this Final Fantasy VII epic. We have Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How are you today, Nate?
Is it hot? That was my Yuffie impression.
Yeah, make sure you pronounce her name right.
Yeah, I almost said it wrong. I'm good. I'm here.
Also joining us, we have Ryan from New York. How are you, Ryan?
I am buried under a pile of minigames and open world traversal.
Hopefully by the end of this podcast, we can climb out of the minigame rubble and
I don't know, man.
Yeah, it'll be an effort, but we'll see if we can get there.
Send a team.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we have Garrison joining us from we're not sure which timeline Garrison is in, but he has managed to be with us here. How are you today, sir?
You know, I was gonna join in with a chocobo sound, but I decided to spare everyone that nightmare.
So, would your chocobo sound be Quay or Wark?
It's funny. I was literally debating that while debating this whole thing, and I feel like I default to the classic Wark, but I feel like they've just rolled with the Quay now, so I feel like I would have done Quay.
So, do you guys know what the difference is? Because I did look this up, and there is a meaningful difference.
Please,
I have no idea.
I forget which is which, but one is for wild chocobos, and the other is for domesticated chocobos.
Wow.
Oh my god! This is a level of deep lore.
Something about the domestication process of chocobos changes their sound.
Apparently, I don't know how that works, but
I think we need to free all the chocobos. I think this sounds like a horrible thing.
No, see, I disagree. I want
Final Fantasy.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, is this Final Fantasy canon?
You know, I found it on a random place on the
timeline. Did they say? Maybe this is the real reason for the remakes.
Part 3 needs the full-on chocobo breeding minigame. We have to progress from Quay to Wark, and I need to spend 500 hours on it, and then race those chocobos again.
Indeed. Well, now that we have solved the mysteries of chocobo noises, we are now going to unravel the mysteries of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The most important thing to say up front is that this is there are spoilers. This is a spoiler zone. So if you are concerned with any spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, this is your warning. Given the nature of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there will also be ample spoilers for the original Final Fantasy VII. The entirety of that original game is on the table for spoilers. And I'm just going to go ahead and say right now, anything in the greater compilation of Final Fantasy VII is fair game. All of us have completed Rebirth. So we are covering through to the end of Rebirth. And I would guess the original Final Fantasy VII, maybe Crisis Core, are really the main two other games that are relevant here. But if it comes up, any other Final Fantasy VII property is on the table. So know that going in. The other thing I will say is we elected Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as a large game. We elected to break this up into 2 podcasts. This is our second part of our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth podcast. If you did not listen to the first part, you should do that before listening to this, because we are not going to retread any ground that we covered in that first podcast. I will include a link to that in the description for this episode. In that first episode, we focused mostly on our early impressions. We kept spoilers before Chapter 8 of the game, and we mostly talked about a lot of mechanical stuff, our thoughts of the combat, the open world, all of that stuff. And we're not going to retread any of that here. We'll give some updated thoughts, but if you have not listened to the first part, be aware that that's there, and you probably want to start there. I think that's all the caveat thing. And now it's time to really dig in. And one thing that we didn't talk about in our first podcast that I wanted to at least give a shout out to is before we forget and get really into other stuff is the music for this game. The music in the original Final Fantasy VII is something I like a lot. That's a really like one of my favorite gaming soundtracks. It's just tons of memorable, iconic themes. And what they did with the music in Remake, I thought was really great. And they've continued that here in Rebirth. And I mainly just wanted to give a shout out to the music. If anyone has any favorite themes, feel free to shout them out.
Let's see. In the context of what we're covering today, I think the one that I was kind of anticipating the most was the Cosmo Canyon theme. Just to see what they did with that, because that's a pretty cool one. I do like some of the Genova themes, and I think the new one, it's called Hollow. They put that in some of the open world sections. It's pretty cool.
I'm a big fan of Aerith's theme. And I especially love in that final Genova fight, the way they kind of start with Aerith's theme and then weave in the Genova theme. I thought that was really cool. Was a little underwhelmed with this game's version of Clash on the Big Bridge. Like, I feel like we've heard better ones before. And then, was the dog chasing minigame, was that in the second half of the game, or was that the first half? Because that was also a great song.
Yeah, I don't remember where that was. I mean, we can talk about it, though.
Was that maybe in, like, North Corel, or...
Are you talking
Yunnan?
about Are you talking about this when you're on that quest of, like, escorting the dog, that side quest?
Yes.
The kind of remixed stamp theme.
Yes.
which is glorious. I agree. That was incredible. And I think really that's what the soundtrack, like what they do so well with the music, is just taking these themes. I mean, that one's also they're taking a theme that was introduced in Remake and remixing that, but just the way they're able to remix these themes for new contexts, I think, is really, really special.
Yeah, they are not afraid of remixing a theme 7,000 times for different areas and locations, and it's all good.
There are so many versions of the Chocobo song in this game. Like, every Chocobo you ride gets its own variation of that theme, as does various parts of the saucer and the Chocobo racing there. Like, there's there have to be at least a dozen versions of the Chocobo theme in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Yuffie singing her own theme song was pretty great.
Yeah, that's the one thing I was going to mention is this game. So in addition to just the great new arrangements and, like, new musical styles of the classic themes, is they really love working in themes, like, into in-game, in-world settings. So, like, yeah, Yuffie singing her own theme and adding lyrics to it. There's a woman in Nibelheim who sings a lyrical song to the tune of the main theme. So yeah, stuff like that's great. Yeah, the Yuffie one you mentioned, Ryan, that cracked me up when I when I saw her doing that.
Not being bored.
Yeah, even stuff like people's like cell phone jingles. It's always like a Final Fantasy VII song. It's really funny.
And I guess in terms of brand new music, I think Remake had the song I mentioned earlier, Hollow, and then this one had Aerith did like a new vocal theme in the Gold Saucer. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which that was pretty cool too.
Forget what that song is called now, but did like that song.
I forget too. No promises to keep,
Yeah, that's it.
something like that.
Yep.
No promises to keep. Yep.
I think I could be wrong on this. I think the Hollow song from Remake might actually be a riff, on something from music from Crisis Core. So that might not actually be wholly original. I could be wrong on
Okay.
that though.
That makes sense. It does have familiar.
But yes, there are some original themes as well. Like we talked about the stamp theme, for example. But yeah, music is fantastic. I wanted to at least make sure we gave that a shout out. And yeah, let's turn to kind of some updated gameplay thoughts. So last time we talked a lot about combat, the open world structure. Like we spent a lot of time talking about that because that is a lot of what you spend time doing in this game is doing side quests, doing all the open world activities, engaging in combat, and in the back half of the game, you do a lot more of it. Like you get some new weapons and new materia, and like you get some new layers to it. But a lot of that structure is still continues to be very much the same. So, I mean, I guess just the open question to pose to you guys: do you have many updated thoughts on the stuff we discussed in our first part? Not to retread any ground, but just in overdoing more of it in the back half of the game. Come away with any new impressions of the combat or the new open zones you went to in the back half or anything like that. I'll ask about Cait Sith in a minute because he's the one playable character we didn't talk about before, but excluding Cait Sith, anything worth mentioning in the structure department?
Not really. I mean, I still like this combat system. I think, like you said, it doesn't really add anything more in the second half of the game, so I don't really have anything more to say about it from Remake or the first half of this game that wasn't already true. I think it still works pretty well. And I guess one thing I did like about the open zones in the second half was just like flying around with the chocobo was fun.
Oh, was that specifically like in Nibelheim or?
Yeah, I guess it was in Cosmo Canyon. You could fly around with them a little bit, and then yeah, in Nibelheim they're just like, yeah, just go crazy. You can you
Like
can just
jet
fly
over
around.
the water.
Yeah.
But I liked
Yeah.
how they kind of mixed up the chocobos in each area to give it a little bit a different feel to how you explore the wide open terrain. I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, because Gongaga, you got the one that could jump around. Cosmo, you got the one that could glide. Nibelheim, you got the one with the water jets. In the Corel, yeah, I'm saying that right. Corel region, you got a buggy. How'd you like the buggy?
Meh.
I
Nope.
asked knowing Nate's not a fan of the buggy.
Nope. Buggy bad. Don't like buggy.
Yeah, it's
The
pretty slow.
buggy was like all the jank of the Mako from the original Mass Effect with none of the just like delightfulness of the jank.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And also, to me, it's intrinsically linked with Cactar Crush and like stopping and like holding up your statue and following the light and then moving and following the light again. Like Shadow of the Colossus let us move and follow beams of light at the same time like 20 years ago. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I guess you were asking about gameplay. I will say, and I mean, some of this I'll probably mention again in overall impressions, but between kind of our last podcast and playing sort of the second half of Rebirth, I did lose a lot of steam. And I think part of that was like you have forced mini games in Costa del Sol, you have forced mini games in the Gold Saucer, and then, you know, as we discussed in the last podcast, just tons of mini games like in the open world and kind of in the side quests and everywhere. Plus, I think the traversal in Gongaga and the gold and Cosmo Canyon, some of that was kind of annoying. Like I found that
Yes.
finding the right path in some of those areas was kind of painful. So at some point, I actually stopped playing for like a week or two because I just got so tired of this game and came back and started mainlining it. And I think I enjoyed it a lot more. And I think some of that is just the pacing and like the main quest with forced mini games, plus the side quests with mini games, plus like the open world content had mini games, and like it's just we talked a lot about it in the last one, but I got kind of really sick of mini games and playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, especially like crossing like the 50-hour threshold.
Yeah, there's just a lot of it, and then the open world zones are very big with a lot of the same activities that you do in every zone. So it definitely feels repetitive, and you kind of feel the weight of all that by the time you're getting into those last couple of zones.
The thing that I think is kind of interesting, and not to belabor this, I do want us to talk about the story, but I agree that like there's just so much game, and like the piece of the game that I thought like I didn't get bored by was the combat. Like I really felt like even though the combat like doesn't really give you substantially new or different tools throughout the game, like you unlock new abilities and synergy skills, but like you're basically playing the same, at least I was basically playing the same way. I was still enjoying that, like, to the very end of the game. Now, I didn't do all the 5 billion combat sims that open up at the end, but the combat was so engaging and so fresh all the way through that it kind of makes the repetition of the mini games and the open world stuff a little more frustrating, because, like, the core package there is just so good. If they had just kind of like let it be like a 60-hour game instead of a 100-hour game.
Yep.
And there's going to be another potentially 100-hour game to come in part 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's going to be a running theme in this podcast, and we even talked about it in our first part, is like a lot of the good things in this game, if there's a negative part to it, it's often that there's just too much of it. Yeah, I think one comment I was going to say, which kind of echoes what you all have said, is there is definitely, I think all of us hit this somewhere in the second part of the Corel region when you get the buggy through Gongaga through to Cosmo. Somewhere in that stretch is when I felt like that's when I started feeling the length of everything. I think in the first half of the game, they did a little bit better job of like open zone followed by a more linear story segment. And I think they like kind of alternated that at a better pace. And I think there's that stretch with the deserty part of the Corel region through Gongaga, through Cosmo, where it's just like open area after open area after open area. And I think those are some of the bigger open areas. Like I feel like I spent more time in Gongaga than and Corel than anywhere. Those two are just huge, and I was pretty completionist with this game. Only at the very end of chapter 12 did I skip a couple things, but like right up until the end, I was doing everything. And it definitely, I felt the pacing kind of fall apart in that one stretch there, compared to the first half. Last time in our last podcast, we kind of ran down all the mini games that appeared in the first 8 chapters, which was a lot. And I was going to run through the new ones, but there actually weren't that many new ones. Most mini games were introduced in the first 8 chapters, so we've already covered those. But there were 3 new mini games introduced after chapter 8. So just real quick, and I pretty much know your thoughts on these 3. Cactuar Crush. Ooh, that's hard to say.
Yeah, say that 3 times fast.
Cactuar Crush. Yay or nay?
What was that one again?
Wow, it didn't scar Ryan like it did the rest of us.
I mean, it's totally possible that I skipped it because at some point, I really did like start kind of. I skipped all the proto relic stuff in the back half.
Yeah.
Skipped a lot of the summon and open world activities. I think I did the live streams and the towers, and like nothing else in some cases.
Right.
Yeah, so this was the proto relic in the Corel region, and you like did basically a little score attack thing where you had to defeat certain Cactuar types in the time limit.
I did the first one, and I was like, man, these proto relics seem like really annoying, and I don't care about Gilgamesh. So
Yeah, for me, the Cactuar crushes were like I would either get them really easily the first try, or it was something I had to try like a bunch of times and just like could not figure out exactly how they wanted me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same boat here.
Yeah. Then we had the gliding mini game in Cosmo Canyon with the gliding the chocobos through the rings. What did you guys think of that one?
I didn't mind
It
it,
was
except for the
okay.
very last one was like weirdly difficult.
Yeah, the last one took me many tries, and I actually had to kind of. The only way I could figure out how to get enough height to make the last ring, I had to actually like turn around like halfway through and like re-hit an air thing. That one was oddly way more difficult than the other three. Any other thoughts on that one? Otherwise, the last one was Gears and Gambits, which was also in the Cosmo Canyon region. That was for the Proto Relic in Cosmo.
Yeah. Trying to remember exactly how that worked.
That
It was like Fort Condor, but not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like there was an enemy in the middle. You had to like set up this crew of little bots that would like go and attack it from 3 different lanes or like circling it. And it was almost like a programmable like I think they called them gambits maybe. But it was like kind of like a Final Fantasy 12-esque like programmable like a mini version of that. It's like surprisingly involved.
Yeah, there were a lot of systems going on in that thing.
Yeah.
I remember for all of them except for I think when you couldn't do this, I just like had it auto set up my team, and that worked just fine. Like I was able to get through just fine doing that because I saw how complicated it looked, and I was like, I don't know if I want to learn this whole separate game right now.
Yeah.
I just learned you could just spam low cost units, and at that point, type advantage didn't really matter. You could just like Zerg rush, and that worked for me. Like I feel like there's an interesting concept there, but you know, coming that late in the game, I was not willing to invest the time to like learn how computer logic if then statements work.
Yeah. I don't think I really liked it. Yeah, I think it was just too much for a minigame. So those are really the only new minigames post Chapter 8 that were introduced. Not a minigame, but I think the back half of the game did have some clunkier like mechanics in the dungeon areas, like throwing boxes as Cait Sith, which is everyone's favorite.
Yeah, I was about to say like it depends on whether you categorize that, because the rolling around as like the cat form was actually kind of fun because it was just like this fast little movement section, but then like the box throwing was so annoying and slow. And I mean, there's also a little section where you play as Aerith, and she has some like key mechanics and wiggle the stick in a circle, and I thought that was kind of mildly annoying as well.
Yeah. It seems like whenever you have to control a character other than Cloud, they want to introduce like some different way they play, and I pretty much always found it annoying.
Yeah.
Cait Sith definitely the bottom of those examples, but and then there was that one the proto relic in Nibelheim, where you had to follow the the cloaked guys, and you could like push them.
Oh yeah, that was goofy.
It's so goofy, and it wasn't really frustrating, other than it just took forever because they
Yeah,
walked
because they just
so
walk really
slow.
slow. Yeah.
And I'm just like, that was definitely a moment where I'm like, what are we doing? Like, why are we doing this? But anyway, the last real gameplay thing I had written down was how did you guys like playing as Cait Sith in combat, like him as a combat character? Because we haven't really talked about playing as him, and he's the one truly new character in this game, seeing as Yuffie was playable in the DLC before.
Yeah, I didn't ever really get a super strong like handle on playing Cait Sith. It didn't click for me. Like it seemed like he both had a lot going on with like being able to ride on the Moogle form or be in like cat form or have the Moogle out while you're also in cat form but separate. So it seemed like there's probably like some best practices for how to play Cait Sith that I just never quite honed in. But I also just found like a lot of his abilities either confusing or underwhelming, like his weapon abilities. Like I either didn't really know what they did or just didn't seem that powerful. So whenever I did play as him, it was just like call out the Moogle, hold down square to spin, and then do the like big melee hit ability. That was pretty much all I did.
Yeah, I kind of feel that there were times where he seemed to generate a lot more stagger than I expected, and I was like, oh, maybe it's like if you summon the Moogle and use the right attack combos, like there's a lot of potential here. But I also didn't really have a good feel for, and didn't really care to spend a bunch of time optimizing for. Plus, you can get knocked off of the Moogle, which. And the other thing I will say about Cait Sith too is that you have to do a section with him solo, and you fight these enemies that can gain immunity,
Yeah.
and that didn't reflect well on him just because those enemies were very annoying. Um, like he has to solo fight these, like they're like these scales, and depending on what you attack them with, they gain an immunity, and they can sometimes use this like really powerful AoE that will just like one shot you. Um, so I died there like 2 or 3 times just because like the attack pattern I was using, they would become immune to it, and then they would summon an AoE, and then if I didn't dodge it correctly, like it would just kill him, and I would be like, "Wow, thanks, game. This is great."
I did find that to be the hardest fight in the game, honestly. I had moments of like feeling like I was doing all sorts of cool stuff with Cait Sith, and then moments of like I have no idea what's going on. I haven't looked up like crazy like gameplay videos from this game, but he does strike me as a character that I bet people have done some like truly insane combos with.
Yeah, that seems right.
Yeah, no, I was pretty much in line with you guys on that on him, and he was not one of my A team characters for sure. Um, all right, so is there, before we move on to story stuff, any last gameplay related things or kind of structure, side quests, whatever that we want to touch on before we move on? As mentioned before, we talked extensively about our thoughts of how the open world works and the combat and the synergies and all that on the previous podcast. So if you want to hear those thoughts, definitely go listen to that. But any last updated thoughts before we move on to story stuff?
Did you guys have a like definite this is my favorite party by the end?
Yuffie and Barrett.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that lines up with what we had talked about last time too.
Yeah, I know we had mentioned that last time. I didn't know if that changed for anybody. The one change that I did make is I stopped using Yuffie as much, and I swapped in Tifa. and just like went full bruiser mode
Yeah.
with Cloud and Tifa getting in there.
Mhm.
And that feels pretty powerful, especially in boss fights.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tifa was good. I did miss when I didn't bring her the ability to like bump up the stagger damage.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
And Cait Sith, I think his Moogle punch did that as well. So that's one thing that he had.
Yuffie's just so versatile.
Yeah, she really
I
is.
actually, because I was switching a lot between Tifa and Yuffie earlier, and then as the game went on, I'm just like, I'm gonna stop thinking about this. I'm just gonna always bring Yuffie because she always finds a use. It seems like. But yeah, I mean, Tifa's super strong, of course.
Yeah.
I pretty much never use the other three, being Red, Aerith, and Cait Sith, unless I was forced to after a certain point.
Yeah, I tried using Aerith a good amount in this game too, and I still just feel like she's just doesn't have quite enough going for her.
I got a little more use out of her. I slapped the ATB, I leveled up and slapped ATB boost on her, where you can like press the triggers and get more ATB. Because I found once I can get a couple wards set up and I can teleport
Yeah.
between them and like do things, that I felt like she kind of got to a good place and was as capable as the other characters then. But it just takes so much setup to get all those wards out. It's like
Yeah,
no other character needs that much ramp up to be useful.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it was, in bosses it could seem worth it, but in regular encounters I never wanted to had to deal with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I did use
Yeah, and I
Aerith.
do.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we did talk about this last time, so I won't say too much, but I do feel like the design of the combat system in FF7, like the encounter, like I think the core combat is fun and solid, but a lot of the encounter design is kind of actively works against it because you have these very short encounters and like the enemies use a lot of like very annoying mechanics like binds and devours and paralysis and invisibility and like so it tries to I think harken back to like those bite-sized JRPG battles, but then you have mechanics and characters like Aerith who really like want a long runway. And you know, if the average encounter length was a bit longer, they might be more interesting or fun to play. Of course, you know, that would change the whole pace of the game, but
Yeah, please do not say anything about this game should be longer.
no, but like you could imagine like fewer longer
Yes,
battles.
I get what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, and I think we've talked about that before. I think the way this combat is designed would definitely lend itself more towards exactly what you're saying, of like fewer,
Yeah,
but more involved, longer fights. Did you have something here, Garrison?
Not really. I just say like I did use Aerith a little bit, but I do think like she is frustrating to use, and I think that's one of my challenges to combat in general. Is I wish ATB wasn't so hard to build with some characters, or I feel like sometimes you get stuck in a loop of like you're getting knocked around, can't build up ATB, can't do anything, you're getting knocked around. But ultimately, I did enjoy Aerith, and she's good for like just destroying bosses with magic. And those wards can be really handy.
Yeah.
I guess the one thing too I will say is that I wish the AI generated ATB more.
Yes.
We did also talk about this, but the AI tends to target whoever you're controlling. So with characters like Aerith, who are kind of slow and have these really long windups, you're at a huge disadvantage for actually taking control of that character. But then if you switch off of her, she just doesn't do anything because the AI like doesn't build ATB and like they're very passive and they don't really. I mean, they technically do stuff, but it's like it won't really win the fight. It feels like unless you're fighting a really weak enemy. But then like a character like Aerith will just sit there in the background and like not build up ATB gauge, so you can't use spells with her.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's why I did like the synergy skills for like helping to spread out ATB a little bit when I remembered to use them. But then I would always get Aerith in trouble because I would play as Cloud most of the time, and the synergy skill with her was like a big melee hit with like a magic damage, and she would teleport next to you to do it. So I'd be like in the middle of everything and just be like, Aerith, come in here, and then she'd get walloped.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I did not remember to use the synergy skills enough. The one I probably used the most was a Cloud and Barrett one where like Cloud like flings bullets with his sword.
Yeah,
So you could
that
do it
one's
at
good.
range. You could do it at range and it was very easy to just build up ATB for both of them.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no other, I mean, there's a lot more things we could talk about, late game side quests and stuff, but I think the more important thing to get to is the story stuff, because there's some things happen in this game. So I think I mean there's a lot of stuff to talk about at the very back chunk of this game. Let's say from when you go to the Temple of the Ancients to the end is what I'll kind of call the ending chunk. But there are some story beats that I want to hit before then, even if that's I think the biggest talking points occur then. And we'll just kind of go through a couple of these in order, and some of these we might go through quickly, but we actually didn't get to talking about Barrett's arc, which actually did happen in chapter 8. So we could have covered it last podcast, but we kind of ran out of time. But I did want to at least touch on this because I think they did a pretty good job, and in some ways I think this is when both Remake and Rebirth have been at their best, is when they take story beats or moments from the original and reenact them mostly faithfully, with maybe adding in some extra detail to them. And I do think they did Barrett's arc, except for the very end, which I'll have a quibble about that. But for the most part with Barrett's arc, I think they did a really good job, and I think they made, like, I really felt for Barrett through seeing that story again, and like I think it actually hit harder than in the original in some ways, even though it hit pretty hard in the original as well. So yeah, did you guys like seeing Barrett's arc and like kind of his flashbacks and retelling of what happened in Corel and his interaction with Dyne and all of that stuff? Anything worth shouting out there?
Yeah, I guess as you said, it's been a long time since I played the original, so I only vaguely like I remember Dyne as like an antagonist. But in Rebirth, like when you walk into, I guess it's North Corel, it's kind of poor and destitute, and like one of the locals just walks up to Barrett and like pours a drink on his head. So they kind of set the stage of like sort of the tone or the history baggage or whatever, however you want to say it. And then later on you get the flashbacks of like them choosing to like work with Shinra and Barrett kind of having a life with his wife. And then of course, like, when everything goes down after the reactor blows up. So, as you said, I think they did a really good job of showing his character and like why it's also part of his character, right? Like why he hates Shinra like so kind of fervently.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think after like seeing all of those scenes, like, I mean, Barrett's a fairly well-defined character for the most part through Remake and Rebirth up until now, but I think you, exactly like you said, you get a much better sense of why he has such a deep and like strong opposition to Shinra, like why that's so core to him. One thing at the end of this whole little arc that stood out to me is the final encounter with Dyne and how Dyne dies is in the original. I mean, in both this and the original, Dyne's kind of lost it a little bit, and he's just really down about everything that happened, and kind of, I don't know, doesn't seem to have much motivation to continue his life, so to speak. In the original, he ends up killing himself.
Yeah.
In Rebirth, he does not.
Right.
And I actually think, and in some ways I get why they changed that. Like, suicide is a tough thing to portray. But I do think in the original, it made more sense for his character. And I think the way he died in Rebirth, which was just Shinra soldiers randomly showing up, which also did not happen in the original.
Yeah. They were just there.
Shinra soldiers just randomly popped up, shoot Dyne.
Yeah.
And then you have the goofy, after this, you've just had this big emotional scene between Barrett and Dyne, and then you have the comic relief Palmer show up, and you have a really weird boss fight.
Yeah.
I really didn't like how that wrapped up. I don't think it did Dyne justice to, because suicide's hard, but it was it showed how far he had fallen down and his struggle, and it felt more real to where his mental state was at that point. And to just have Shinra soldiers come in and just kind of even if he didn't commit suicide in this game, having a more, I don't know, it's something about it just feels incomplete of just having Shinra soldiers run in and kill him. It's he didn't really have a good closure there.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So that was one change that I don't know that I agreed with. Otherwise, I really like Barrett's arc. Anything else to add on this before we move on to the next little section? So kind of the next big story point I had written down is when you go to the Gongaga reactor in the next chapter, in chapter 9.
Yeah.
So I actually kind of forget some of the details. Nate, do you or anyone else kind of want to set this one up?
Yeah. So you go from Corel to Gongaga, and when you get to the village, Gongaga itself, there's a destroyed reactor near the village, and Cloud and crew are hanging out there, and there's a appearance from Cisne, who's a character from Crisis Core, who's taken up residence in the village here. I think she's a former Turk, if I remember right. But long story short, they end up going to the reactor because they hear the weapon, the cries of the weapon, and go to investigate. And a whole bunch of stuff kind of pops off in that reactor scene. So, high level summary is what? Cloud loses it a little bit in there. That's one of the first times we kind of see him completely dissociate in a way that is very surprising to the rest of the party, and he does things adopt the Sephiroth stance of holding the blade up above his shoulder pointed forward. That is very classic Sephiroth stance. And then just completely eviscerates a bunch of Shinra troopers. And this game, this is something we'll probably come back to later, but the way this game handles the idea of violence is very goofy and inconsistent. But they take these random moments to be oh, Cloud's gone off the deep end. He's murdering the enemy soldiers that you're already fighting a million times every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah. Then he really crosses the line when he, Sephiroth is in his ear sowing doubts about Tifa again, and then he actually attacks her and knocks her into the Mako in the kind of open exposed reactor, and then there's a whole sequence with her in the Mako in the live stream with the weapon, seeing all the whispers. I guess what I would say about that that was the first time where they started introducing the idea of like different factions of whispers and like how they were like fighting. So there's like live stream whispers or planet whispers, I guess, depending on how you want to think about it. The way I've been thinking about it is like there's light whispers and there's dark whispers. The light ones are the live stream planet whispers that are aligned with the weapons, and then there's the dark whispers that are aligned with Sephiroth at this point in the story, at least. And I don't know like if those are supposed to be a continuation of the whispers from Remake or if they're separate entities, but yeah, it's a bunch of wildness in this section.
Yeah, I was really curious what your all's interpretation of the whispers were, because in Remake, the whispers, as I understand it, existed to preserve the original Final Fantasy VII timeline.
Yeah.
But then you defeat the Whisper Harbinger or boss or whatever it was called. And in theory, that's not a thing. And I think here in Gongaga is the first time we see them in Rebirth.
Yeah, it is.
And I assume they don't have the same purpose they have in Remake. So I don't really know what their purpose is, other than I kind of, by the end of the game, by the time we got through the Temple of the Ancients and all that stuff, I kind of just went to a place of assuming they're kind of soldiers of the life stream and then Genova / Sephiroth. And yeah. I don't know if you guys have any other read on that, or...
It does seem to be the way they're kind of just presented, as like it's just a manifestation of the power of the two sides fighting, which is, the planet and the life stream versus Sephiroth and Genova.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I feel like the whispers didn't really do a whole lot for me, but we'll probably get to that also later because they pop up near the end.
It's pretty goofy.
Yeah.
But Tifa also sees. I forgot to mention this. Tifa also sees some of the, like, when she's in the Mako in the live stream, she relives some of her childhood memories that she had forgotten. And these are actually scenes that are in the original game, but they occur later when Cloud and Tifa are in the live stream together.
Yes.
And we're kind of getting those earlier now, and we kind of get that idea that cemented that Tifa has also lost memories of her earlier life. Maybe not quite to the extent that Cloud has, but it seems to be a common problem for our band of heroes to forget things.
Yeah, go ahead, Garrison.
So, like, I do think this part is where I would say perhaps the plot of the game worked the best for me. I still honestly have no idea what the whispers are, and even less idea what the whispers are at the end of this game than I did at the start of this game. But, like, I think Nathan was very right, too, about the goofiness of, like, fixating on the violence when we're already mowing down soldiers left and right. But I do think the way it kind of, like, really sets up, like, how messed up Cloud's head is, all the weird memories, Sephiroth's control, the stuff with Tifa and the weapons I thought was really well done. All of that worked really well for me in this section. Again, the whispers a little bit less, the weird fixation on like, oh, Cloud's killing people now didn't work as well, but I think the overall package I thought was pretty effective, and I do think kind of highlighted the ways that this game could enhance the story of the original game and like tell the story in a way the original couldn't just because of the graphics limitations. I really like this part, and I wish it had been more of this and then less of kind of what it turned into in the final hours.
Yeah, and the goofiness around like the violence and how they are like so inconsistent about it, like it is dumb. I can also get past it because it's like it's just very clearly like a narrative trick they're trying to use to say something about where the characters are. So like, yes, on its face it doesn't make sense and it's kind of stupid, but like the game is being so like clear and putting it out front. Like, we're telling you this thing right now. Cloud is not well, and he's acting in a different way that everybody is reacting to. It just doesn't quite land from like a common sense angle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we'll loop back to this later, but I think one of the things that was done really well in this part was the party reacting to Cloud's behavior and noticing, like, Cloud's not right, something's going on. Again, in ways that I think in the final hours they kind of dropped the ball on.
Yeah.
I get what you're.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I do get what you're saying. I think the difference that they try to use to portray, and I think you're exactly right in that it's kind of setting the tone for like why Cloud does what he does. Although, the difference I think that they try to use is that he is like executing people basically. And you see this later, like when they beat the Turks and Elena is on her back, most of the time in those situations, they'll just like, put their guns away and, walk off into the sunset or whatever. But he basically starts menacing her with the sword.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that like, that, and that's what he does to the soldiers, right? He just like kills a couple of them, like stabs them on the ground. But one thing that's interesting about this scene in particular is that the story had kind of been casting aspersions towards Tifa. And so it was kind of interesting when this twist happened because there were like these suspicious like tones or like innuendos being thrown at Tifa, like where were you? Like what's going on? Like I didn't read too much into it, but I did think it was a really interesting sequence, like and a twist from the original where there were some questions raised about like Cloud not trusting Tifa and then her getting knocked in and like having these flashbacks. I thought that was an interesting way to fit some of that together.
Yeah.
I do also want to mention a couple things about Gongaga. Real quick, if we have a second, or if we're done with the
let me
reactor.
before a couple other thoughts on the reactor stuff. See which one to start with. Yeah, the Tifa in the live stream was definitely parallel to the similar scene for Cloud, and I think for me, and this gets touched on more later in the Nebel section, but I don't think when I played the original I fully internalized just how much trauma there has been for a lot of these characters in different ways, but for the specific moment for Tifa, of just like how much stuff she's gone through.
Yeah.
As she's like piecing her life back together, and like I think Rebirth in general does a pretty decent job for not just Tifa, but for a lot of the characters of kind of like really driving home just how much horrible stuff they've a lot of them have had to go through. And yeah, I think in some, and then as for the like Sephiroth kind of trying to make Cloud doubt Tifa, that kind of wraps up in this moment, right? Like this is kind of the last.
Yeah.
The Gongaga reactor is kind of the last time that's ever a thing, right?
I think so. I think they mention it again later, and Cloud like apologizes about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think that is like an active plot point after this.
Yeah, I feel like they kind of could have kind of wrapped that up a little better. I do agree with what you said, Ryan, that like they use the flashbacks to kind of fill in that and like as a way to be like, no, Tifa is legit and she's doing like there's no reason to doubt her. But I think they could have like, I don't know, something about that felt a little incomplete, I guess. It's hard to put my finger on. And then something Garrison or maybe all of you said is like how the party reacts when Cloud gets weird. And we'll definitely have more of this later in the Temple of the Ancients section, but I feel like they were also kind of hit or miss with that because like sometimes Cloud would do some like him kind of attacking Tifa in this moment in the reactor in a way, and like you would think if this party you're traveling with, if one member attacks another or pushes them into the puts them in a situation where they potentially could have died, like you'd be a lot less inclined to to trust that person is capable of leading your party anymore. So I feel like they cut Cloud a lot of slack. Like even when they like say something, they don't really. I don't know. If I would be much more suspicious of Cloud after those actions, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
The only other quick thing I had is these weapons were not in the original. Like these specific weapons we see in this part. And we don't even hear about the weapons at all until after the Temple of the Ancients in the original, right? Maybe they're like mentioned offhand, but we certainly don't see them.
I don't think they're even mentioned until the Northern Crater in the original when they appear. And yeah, they're like all very bespoke creatures in the original. And I think the only things we see in this game are the two that look almost identical at the two reactors that they see them at. So there'll almost certainly be more in part 3, but yeah, these ones weren't in the original.
Yeah. Anyway, those were my random thoughts. Ryan, what else did you want to say about the Gongaga region?
Oh, let's see, a couple things. One is that it's kind of neat to see it as like a striking jungle area, but they did mention a couple things about Zack, which I don't know a lot about the Zack storyline, but it felt like it added maybe a bit more purpose to the region. The other thing I wanted to shout out real quick is we've talked about it off and on, but the side quests in this game sometimes are really great at like character development. There's one in Gongaga where Barrett meets this like children's book author, who apparently is like the author of one of Marlene's favorite books, which I thought that was just a fun little interaction.
Yeah,
I think you end up having Red 13 go do poses in different parts of Gongaga, like just tons of fun for that. Not all of them are that good or whatever, but I kind of really love that character moment with Barrett being like, "Can I shake your hand?"
Yeah, that little world building and character stuff, like that type of world building and character stuff is, I agree, that's pretty great. Yeah, that does the Zack, because Gongaga is where Zack is from, and there's definitely a lot of fun little nods or whatever. When I got there, you mentioned Cisne earlier, Nate. When I got to Gongaga and saw Cisne, I just had this moment like, of course she would be here.
Yeah,
because,
of course.
because she's a character in the greater Final Fantasy VII universe, and so they're gonna work her in here somewhere. And yes, she was a former Turk. And where would they put her? Of course, she was one of Zack's friends, so they're gonna put her in Gongaga. And I don't know if you guys noticed. Well, I guess so. I played Crisis Core, and I know you did, Nate.
Yeah.
Did either of you, Garrison or Ryan, play Crisis Core?
I have not. No.
Not much of.
So this is probably fresher for me than you, Nate, because you played the original Crisis Core, and I played the reunion re-release that came out just like a year and a half ago. But anyway, the music in Gongaga Village is from Crisis Core.
Oh, okay.
So I immediately noticed that when I walked in as well. I was like, oh, of course. So yeah, there's a lot of Crisis Core throwbacks in Gongaga. Crisis Core, sorry, this has no bearing on anything, but I want to mention it anyway. Crisis Core throwback from Costa del Sol. There was a beach scene in Crisis Core where you're on the beach and you get attacked, and Zack does not have a weapon, and he picks up an umbrella and fights with it. And The exact same thing happens to Cloud in this game. And even like the pose and the manner in which he picks up the umbrella is very reminiscent of Zack from Crisis Core. So
I love all the like little things they do with Cloud's mannerisms and body language changing here and there. Like they somehow make it so clear and yet like not like so out of place.
yeah, for sure. It is really interesting playing this game knowing the ties between Cloud and Zack, because they're just so subtly hinting at it all the time. And the way like Aerith and Tifa, who they have to know a lot of what Cloud's misremembering, and just like the way they kind of talk around it and act around Cloud when stuff's getting weird is, I think, really fun.
Yeah.
All right, so we have I wanted to touch on Cosmo Canyon a little bit, that chapter. And the main thing I wanted to talk about, there's really not much here, so this could be quick. The main thing I really wanted to talk about is stuff around the Gi.
Yep.
But before we talk about the Gi, is there anything else in the Cosmo region people want to talk about? I think for me, this area was mostly in line with the original, and I think some of the scenes with Red were pretty well done, but I also don't know that I have much interesting to say here outside of the Gi.
I just found Red's voice suddenly changing to be very weird. And I'm still not entirely sure why that happened.
It's like such
That
a
was
this
pretty
game
good.
thing.
Yeah, no, that was pretty good. Like, I was also kind of thrown by that. I guess because he's technically like, even though he's 40 something, like he's basically a teenager in whatever his species years.
Yeah. So he was basically faking sounding older and tougher so that he could impress the party all this time. Except with Aerith, who he would talk to in his normal voice earlier in the game.
Yeah, I think I actually mentioned that in the first podcast. The weird moment where his voice was different. I'm like, what is happening?
And they even put in like the subtitles in those scenes. Question, question, question. And it's like such a this game thing to like tease this big mystery about like who's this mysterious person talking to Aerith.
Yeah.
And then it's just Red being a complete goober.
Yeah. It's very silly.
I kind of love it. The other thing no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's kind of a fun goof, whatever. What doesn't work for me quite as well is that when he changes his voice, he also entirely changes his personality. And I'm like, you could still be the same personality, just disguising your voice. So I don't know if they had to go that extreme with it, of like when he's using the gruff voice, he does act very mature, but then when he's using his actual voice, he acts very childish and like a puppy or something.
Yeah, it is very cute to see him act like a puppy, though.
Fair.
I think he does say something about like putting on an act as a wizened warrior, though, at one point.
Yeah. The other like goofy thing that happens here that I'm amazed they didn't also try to like make into a big mystery was they show the scene earlier of Reeve, who's Cait Sith, changing their like pictures on the wanted posters in his like database in the Shinra HQ, and then when you get to Cosmo Canyon, they're like looking at a wanted poster and they're like, clearly it's not you, and they're like, wow, those pictures don't look like us. And I'm like seriously amazed that they didn't flip those so that you saw the weird wanted poster first, and they were like, oh, what's with this, and then explain it later.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually I don't know, that scene made me laugh. That scene really worked for me.
It is funny.
But you're right. They did show surprising restraint on that one.
Yeah, they didn't try to make it a big mystery of why there are suddenly different pictures of Cloud and Tifa and Barrett being distributed.
Yeah, that was a good bit.
But yeah, other than that, like the Gi is the big thing that like this game really like expanded on.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about the Gi because yeah, I mean the Gi were certainly in the original, and you go do that trial with Red and you fight some Gi and like yeah, you have the whole backstory of like oh there was that conflict and Red's dad went off to fight and defend and like that stuff was in the original, but then like after that part in this remake, you actually like start talking to one of the Gi and like you go with him to like their sacred ground or whatever it's called and like he explains a whole lot of the Gi and how but since they're not from this world they're from some other world I guess I don't did he even explain how they got there or
So, I mean, no, they don't, but I got the sense, and I think I have some notes on this. Yeah, they're called outsiders. They can't return to the live stream because they don't come from the live stream.
Mhm.
And then he says one thing. So this is Guy Natak, kind of like the leader that you talk to. He says, with the passing of eons, the star we called home began to wane until at last it was subsumed by your own. The earth shook, seas boiled, skies shattered, and time stopped. Few of my people survived the chaos and calamity. Those who did began a new life here, but to the planet we were not welcome. Which I almost like thought the way he was talking about it was like they were on another like planet or planetoid that like collided with the planet that you're on, but it could be like weird multi-dimensional stuff too. Like
Yeah.
at one point when I was looking at all this stuff and trying to think about it, I was like, did they come on the same like meteor as Genova? You know, but it's not ever
Yeah.
really spelled out so clearly.
I had that thought too that they could have come with Genova, but yeah, I really don't know. Yeah, when you were just reading what you were just reading, I'm like, oh, is this related to the timelines as well?
Right, it could be.
And another thing I didn't think of until just now is I forget how Bugenhagen describes the creation of things. If like maybe somewhere in that something could have happened, I don't know. But either way, it sounds like it's not explicitly explained how the Gi got here.
Yeah.
But they did get here from another planet, so they're not from the live stream. They can't return. You get this whole spiel of how they're basically here stuck between life and death, and they don't want to be that way forever.
Yeah.
Because that sucks.
Like kind of legitimate, guys.
Yep. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we got any explanation in the original of how the black materia was created.
I don't think so.
And here we do get an explanation, which is that the Gi created it to try and end their everlasting torment.
Yes.
And
through obliteration.
yes. And it was basically like their sorrow and their prayers like formed into materia. And correct me if you guys, let me know if you guys have a different interpretation. But yeah, they're they're basically wanting to use the black materia to destroy everything, which will also end their suffering.
Yep, that is. I'm almost 100% confident that that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is like, and that is one thing that is interesting about this is because, again, my memory of the original FF7 was kind of vague, but you know, you go and you see Nanaki's father at the end, Seto, but I guess like the remembering why you did any of that. Like I vaguely remember the Cave of the Gi, and I remember seeing Seto at the end of it, but that's kind of all I remember. But you know, in Rebirth, like it's pretty cool. I guess they make it a very eerie section, but then, as you said, they pretty clearly explain that, like, okay, the Gi were outsiders. They created the black materia, and like their purpose is basically to try and like, you know, to kind of like, yeah, obliterate or annihilate everything, which will presumably like I guess, end their suffering. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, in some extended lore, or maybe there was some subtext or some intention in the original FF7, but I don't remember that being communicated at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the specifics around that, I also thought were maybe worth noting, is that he says that they claimed the greatest of materia from the planet, which they kept calling purest of materia. And then he says they imbued it with their desire for freedom, steeped in our one desire, purest of materia no more, with pain and spite made black. So it's almost like they took something and corrupted it.
Yeah.
Like something that already existed and was important, and then the Cetra stole it from them and sealed it away in the temple.
Right. Is this okay? Is this the timeline?
We're gonna get
where,
way in the weeds here.
Yeah. Is this the timeline where Aerith's white materia is clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that does come back into play at the very end, I think.
Yeah.
The idea of the black materia being created from like sorrow, because Cloud has the clear materia at the end and it turns into black materia.
Yeah, I didn't think about this until just now when you were reading that black materia description, but I wonder if, now I'm thinking there is some relation between the black and white materia and how they affect each other and are created and all that.
And there's weird timeline shenanigans with the white materia that we can get into later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting though. I mean, I wonder if the other timelines, the black materia in there is non-existent or different because the white materia in the other timelines is different from how it is in this timeline. And
it's really confusing and unclear. But I definitely think there's a correlation there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an end scene that I'll ask at the end, but related to this. But
and I feel like maybe the interesting thing is that, like, I mean, clearly there's not a whole lot of detail on what happened to the original world of the Gi tribe, but it sounds like their world was more or less destroyed by a meteor. And so, like,
essentially,
I don't know. It's weird because, like, it sounds like, I don't know. I feel like maybe they half-heartedly tried to, like, connect those two things, but maybe didn't go all the way. Maybe the translation was weird. Maybe there's more to be revealed, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Who knows? This game's weird, y'all.
This game is weird.
I did think this section worked though in expanding on the Gi from the original and giving the black materia a backstory. I thought was cool.
I really like this section. The other weird thing that I'll call out about this is the whole. So you go through the cave, which is like Nanaki's trial, Red's trial, where you reach Seto, and he kind of has the revelation about his dad. And that was all the same as the original game. And then Gi Natak appears. And suddenly, weirdly, the whole party is there, even though it was just Red and Barrett that went on the trial. And then you go on a boat across the live stream to the Gi village and have all this exposition from Gi Natak and learn all the history. And then that scene just ends in a really weird way that I didn't quite understand. It's like you're talking to Gi Natak, and he literally says, "Alas, it appears we have been discovered." And then like a green live stream style mist surrounds them, and then you're back in Seto's cave, and it's like, what really happened there? Like, were they under some sort of spell? Was there like some interdimensional stuff going on? It's obviously not answered, but I thought that was like strange that it was presented that way instead of it just being, oh, you went further in the cave and found more information, that they decided to do it that way.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
My gut was that this being discovered was something to do with Sephiroth, but I didn't really interpret it as like, oh, maybe they weren't actually there, because the way you described it is like they kind of appear back.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
It is interesting. I mean, this is kind of speculation, but I think Gina Talk mentions the Cetra a couple times, and like that, they're actually he did not have like a very favorable opinion. Like he kind of even
Yeah, I mean
implied
they
that
were
they were sort
enemies
of like,
basically.
yeah, he implied that they were sort of like, I don't know, like authoritarian or something like that, like really kind of vicious. Um,
Yeah.
and so like maybe if, he was entreating the party to recover the black materia, and if that was some kind of like,
Right.
dream or vision, then maybe like the Cetra or the live stream or whatever would kind of like, I guess,
Yeah.
want to dispel it or make the Gi like go back or whatever.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. If the Cetra are one with the planet, then they and are antagonistic toward the Gi, then maybe the live stream itself would be sort of acting against the Gi's the Gi's ideas and plans.
Right. Could be something like that. You're right.
Yeah.
It was a bit vague, like what was going on.
Yep.
The only other quick thing I wanted to mention, there's not really much to discuss here, but there was a Zack scene right when you were taking the little boat to Ginatok's area, and when that scene ended, it like cut back to Aerith had her hand in the live stream, and it seemed very clear that she like the way the scene transitioned from Zack back to the party.
Yeah, because
And-
Zack touches unconscious Aerith's hand in Zack's world, and then it goes to Aerith's hand in the live stream, and she pulls that out and is like surprised at some sensation she felt. So like, there's clearly a connection between whatever is going on with Zack's world and the live stream, and potentially a direct connection with Aerith, or it might be a more general connection. It's hard to say.
Yeah, but yeah, there's definitely some way to communicate or to at least feel something through the different timelines,
right?
That they allude at there. Which Garrison, in the previous podcast, you had a galaxy brain theory that Zack was in the live stream, and when I saw that moment, I'm like, maybe Garrison's onto something. And then
at that point, I was like, yeah, he nailed it.
Boy, what a roller coaster!
and then things happen later, but yeah,
I still think it could be true.
Yeah. All right. Anything else with Cosmo or the Gi, or are we ready to move on to the next thing I wanted to highlight?
Nope.
All right.
Let's move on.
So the next chapter is the Nibel region, which we've highlighted pronunciations when we've gotten them. I definitely always said Nibelheim as a kid instead of Nibelheim. But anyway, I don't have anything major in the Nibelheim section, but I do have a couple things that I thought were interesting. I think this chapter we really get, which makes sense because we're back to Nibelheim. We really get more focus of what I mentioned earlier of like Cloud and Tifa's like past history and trauma. I think that's continued to be done well. We have an interesting moment when they first start climbing the mountain where Cloud gets some visions of, basically he gets some flashbacks to what happened 5 years ago, and he mistakenly thinks that Zack was the soldier that drowned in the river.
The image of him thinking Zack is just going down the river going, help, help, flailing his arms around. Like, I don't know why. I was cracking up at that.
Yeah. So this is like, because that wasn't in the original, so this is like a new layer of like Cloud misremembering things even more.
I feel like this is my read on this. Like they couldn't sustain under the weight of pretending that Cloud doesn't remember anything about Zack for 2 whole games.
Fair.
And they were just like, okay, he's gonna have to remember that Zack was a person that he knew and worked with. So how can we have that and still have him not remember that he was not in the position that he thinks he was in during the Nibelheim incident? So like, I felt like it was kind of like a like they were taking a half step because they didn't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're probably right on that. And then Tifa's response to that is funny because Cloud's like, I think Zack died here.
Yeah.
And Tifa's just like,
Sure.
how about you don't say anything to Aerith about that? Let me handle it, okay?
Yeah, which is interesting later. I don't know if we want to skip around at all here, but
Yeah, I mean, if it's related, go ahead and bring it up.
when you go on the dates in the Gold Saucer with either Aerith or Tifa, they will bring that up. Like Cloud asks them, like, "Hey, have you guys talked about this weird thing that I remembered?" And both of them will like show the memory of them talking about it, and then just lie to his face.
Yep.
And say, "No, we didn't."
Yes. Yeah, I think you're definitely right that they're having to find ways to stretch out this mystery for as long as they have.
But I do think, and I'm getting way off track here, I do think it's interesting when I was kind of like rewatching scenes and like thinking about like Cloud's position in the party and how everybody thinks about him. It really comes across multiple times in this game. Like people are having conversations that you don't see. Like other party members are having like serious conversations between themselves that you don't see, and like I actually really think that works and like is cool, and you get a feeling that there is like a group dynamic with all these different personalities and different relationships and different levels of trust. And like I thought that was really cool that Aerith and Tifa are like talking about all this stuff. It even comes up earlier in like Calm at the beginning of the game, where they're willing to talk to each other more openly. But then when Tifa goes to Cloud, everything's like very timid and tentative, and like trying to like make sure we don't like cross any lines. And like I thought that was a really cool like through line that I noticed in this game.
100% agree.
Well, and part of that too is that every time Tifa starts to bring up a subject that like Cloud just can't remember because his memories are scrambled, like he like gets the headaches or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I think even when she tries, it's like, he starts kind of having the head pain or whatever, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna back off.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't think anybody's wrong for not wanting to talk to Cloud. I wouldn't want to talk to him either.
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting when most games and most stories are just told from like main character perspective, and main character knows everything, and everybody talks to main character because everybody likes main character. And this game just like 100% does not do that.
Yeah, which I mean, in my opinion, one of the coolest things about the original, from a story standpoint at least, like I think the best story thing it did was be an unreliable narrator for like 2/3 of the game.
Right.
Before you learn that, Cloud's memories were all bad and everything he's been saying, and you've mostly been following from his perspective. All of that was unreliable because he misremembered everything, because everything got scrambled. And yeah, in Rebirth, they know that, assuming you played 7, so they're playing around with that for sure. Do you think? I mean, it's very obvious that Aerith and Tifa know what's going. Like, know what's going on. Do you think all the other party members, like, do you think Yuffie knows the extent of Cloud's scrambled memories? Like, do you think everyone knows?
I think Yuffie doesn't know anything.
I mean, I don't know about knows the extent of his memories, but Barrett definitely calls him out. I actually think one of the funnier scenes, which comes a little later, is when Barrett yanks the black material away from Cloud.
Yeah.
Barrett is like he cuts him some slack, but he is like, he calls him a space case and tells him to get his head screwed on straight, and like,
yeah.
He basically can kind of see that Cloud is losing it a bit.
I feel like Tifa probably tried to talk to this stuff about Barrett about Cloud's memories and stuff, and he was like, I don't know what's wrong with that guy. I don't really care, but he seems off to me.
As long as he does the job.
Yeah, exactly. And Red probably knows more than we realize, because I think he talks to Aerith a lot, and there's this whole thing. So again, going back to the date scenes from the Gold Saucer, on if you get Red 13 on your date, he tells you that him and Aerith could both see the future when you were back in Midgar. And he just kind of casually says that.
Okay. And Cloud probably doesn't react at all.
Not really. He's like, oh.
Yeah.
Well, when you say that, is that like when they were in Midgar, he had the ability to see the future, and they've both lost it since? Is that?
Yeah. He literally says, back in Midgar, I don't remember the exact quote. I don't have it written down, I don't think, but he says like that back in Midgar, him and Aerith could both see the future, and then the Whispers took that away, and they can't really remember everything that they saw, but he knows, like he says, like, I don't really remember exactly what's supposed to happen, but I know Aerith is in danger and you've got to save her. Like, that's his main point there.
Well, thankfully we do that and don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really curious how, in part 3, how the whole reconstructing Cloud's memories will go. Because I do think that's one of the most interesting subplots throughout this whole game.
Yeah.
And we do get a good amount of that in Nibelheim. I don't know that I have. That was the main stuff I wanted to talk about in this area. Of course, you have your whole. This is where all the playing as Cait Sith happens in the Shinra Mansion, and you do meet Vincent here. Mm-hmm. He doesn't really play much of a role. I mean, we get a couple comments about like how he was Shinra security, and like I don't remember if all that was quite in the original, but there's still not really a lot there. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to say about Vincent. I feel like we didn't really get much of him.
Yeah, I feel like they definitely wanted to include Vincent in this game, but like probably just had to make the decision to not make him a playable character, and so he just does kind of feel like a weird tag along. Like, I'm here, I'm just gonna hang out, say some like cryptic things, transform into a weird werewolf monster and have a boss fight, and then we'll all be cool after that. It's fine.
Yeah.
I think it kind of works though, right? Because in the original game, he was an optional character you got for basically going back to Shinra Manor and having that fight.
Yeah.
So in some ways, he's like Yuffie in that they just kind of, even though he was optional, they just slot him right in. And you kind of do something similar, I guess. And then in some ways, he's kind of like Red from the first game, right? Like you show up, get him out, and then he just kind of runs along with you for the last stretch of the game.
Yeah.
And it probably is smart to keep one or two characters, in this case Vincent and Sid, as like new combat characters to learn for the third game.
Yeah, that 100% makes sense.
I think Sid might actually be a little weirder because I don't know. I don't remember exactly the role he played in the first game, but did it involve like piloting a small biplane that gets turned into a boat?
No, I mean, I guess this is a good place as anywhere to talk about Sid, but I mean, his role in this game is completely new.
Yeah, I mean, he has the tiny Bronco in the original game, and it does crash into the sea and become a boat. But other than that, yeah, he doesn't serve the same purpose. Like, we don't even go to Rocket Town in this game, which is where he's from and where you meet him in the original. So he is just kind of inserted here.
Yeah. And they have reordered where Rocket Town is, and the tiny Bronco got turned into a boat in the original because it got shot down. Where in this game, the engine just dies or something. Like it's not.
My headcanon is it was the extra weight of Vincent coming on board that made the engine explode. So Vincent needs to hit the gym after all those years in the coffin, is what I'm saying.
He might be the thinnest one of them all, too.
I'll just add real briefly about Nibelheim. Great open world section, fun to traverse, not too long.
Yep.
A+. I wish the rest of the game had been that pace. The mansion, a little more problematic with that Cait Sith stuff, but love Nibelheim as just an open world area.
Yeah,
I do agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also like the Nibel region as an open world area. The only other story thing I'll kind of call out for this part of the game is this is where it starts to become clear that there's going to be an escalating conflict between Wutai and Shinra for part 3, because there's this whole sequence of like Wutai soldiers being at the Nibel reactor and being killed by Shinra troops, and Glenn and, well, quote unquote Glenn and Rufus is continuing like back and forth, and Glenn being a puppet of Genova, who we find out by the end of the game, kind of trying to orchestrate this conflict between Wutai and Shinra. That's where that really takes off in this section.
Yeah, that's a good call out, because that was not really a part of the original, and to your point, I assume it'll play a bigger role in part 3.
Yeah, at this point, I'm fully expecting Wutai to be a big part of part 3, with like open warfare between Shinra and Wutai as part of the backdrop of things going on while the heroes are trying to figure out what to do about Sephiroth.
Yeah, because we don't go to Wutai at all in this game either.
Correct.
Which I hope that lends Yuffie a bigger role, because I mean, it's probably tricky with her being an optional character in the original, but I feel like her character, like so many of the characters, I mean, obviously all the characters who were in Remake have had a lot of time and development, and they're like the core characters, I feel like, in ways, but a number of the characters get some good backstory and fleshing out. Like, you have an arc for Barrett, you have an arc for Red, like even Cait Sith kind of gets, some character moments in this game, and I feel like Yuffie kind of gets nothing. And even when you're learning about the creation of the Black Materia, she's just still like comic relief style, just being like, "Ooh, I got to get my hands on that materia." Like that's her one character trait that they just like lean into, I think, too hard in some ways. It's just like
they definitely do. And then even when you go to like the trials in the temple, where everybody has like their personalized trauma dump trial, it's just like, oh yeah, remember the DLC and the guy that she was with, and he got kind of murdered or something by the weird guy? Yep, that was hers. So she's definitely like sidelined in a lot of ways, and I do think when we go to Wutai in part 3, she'll have a much bigger arc. I hope
so too, for sure. But yeah, that's a good call out that those machinations are happening. Also, that happens when you are leaving the Shinra Manor. We learn the fate of everyone's favorite soldier, Roche.
Yeah.
Oh,
Roche.
Yeah.
Which I guess, well, no, was that always a thing? Like the implication was that the kind of the black robes were all like burned out probably soldiers or Genova.
No, most
Well,
of the
they're
black.
all
Most,
so they
It's
all are
isn't it implied
experiments.
that's
Sorry,
okay?
go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, I was just wondering, like, if by that sequence they were implying that that was like the final stage of degradation. Although it
Yeah,
is funny that like when Roche, like you have that fight and then he stands up and he's immediately wearing a black
yeah,
robe like out of
it's so
nowhere.
goofy.
It's like apparently when you hit that final stage of degradation, like a black robe just magically appears on your body.
Yeah, yeah. That's step 4 of 7 of the Genova reunion process. um,
yeah,
no, but it's not just any soldier's degradation. It's like I might be misspeaking, but I think it's Hojo's specific experiments with Sephiroth's cells that he is doing that creates the black robe. So like there's an earlier scene with Roche. I think it's after you beat him at the Junon parade sequence.
Mm.
He goes, I guess, back to Shinra HQ and gets a new experiment done on him by Hojo, which presumably is using Sephiroth cells. And then he comes in and finds Cloud again and loses that fight, and then turns into a black robe weirdo.
It is interesting because I don't, and I may be totally misremembering this. I thought there were only like a specific number of those black robes, like maybe like 100 or something. But like during the course of the game, you see so many of them, like
They're everywhere.
die in random ways, and like just like they show up everywhere, and a bunch of terrible stuff happens to them. Like they all kind of die, like while they're shuffling along to wherever they're going.
And the funniest scenes to me are when like Turks or Shinra people are just like flying around in a helicopter, and they just got one in the back of the helicopter just sitting there. It's like they're just like weirdly like just like dropping them off around the world to see where they'll go. It's like part of their intelligence operation.
yeah. It's all part of Hojo's experiments, as he wants
Yeah.
to see if he wants to see if you drop them off in some random place, what they'll do.
Yeah, so that's kind of why they're everywhere, I think.
Yeah. So my understanding is a lot of the black robes, if not ex-soldiers, they were injected with Sephiroth cells, and my understanding, at least from the original canon, is that they were the survivors of the Nibelheim incident were basically captured by Shinra, and Hojo experimented on them and injected cells. So they were just the inhabitants of Nibelheim, not ex-soldiers.
Yeah, I definitely think that all the survivors of Nibelheim went through that process, but I don't know if it was only those people. I don't know if there were supposed to be more than that or not.
Yeah. I mean, your point, Ryan, is that there are a lot of them, seemingly more than the population of Nibelheim could have ever been, is definitely holds. So it seems like they're getting them from elsewhere as well, and could include ex-soldiers like Roche, though, as Nate mentioned, he got some extra cells injected, so which seemed to affect it as well. But yeah, any other Nibelheim that we want to talk on? So if not, I think we'll turn to the next little section, which is when you go back to the saucer to get the keystone, and you also have the date, which I don't know that there's a lot to call out here, because that for the most part went to form, from what I remember, with the original. Though I will ask, sorry?
The whole theater sequence?
Well, that was more expanded, yes. But in terms of the main story beats. But yeah, what do you think of the theater sequence?
I mean, it was kind of fun, but I was like, man, this feels like it would be a better fit for like a Final Fantasy 4. Like, if they ever did like a Final Fantasy IV remake, like maybe you would have these kind of like, because you have Cloud straight up with like a sword and shield, like him dressed in a cape with a sword and shield. Barrett had some sweet looking armor. But yeah, it was I was like, man, like it's kind of neat and cinematic and stuff, but it almost felt like it didn't fit to me. It was like, we're now in like a performance theater in the middle of Final Fantasy VII. I don't know. That was kind of how I felt about it. It was fun, but it was like the whole like operatic fight sequence. You know, it was kind of a neat little mini game, but it was also like, I don't know exactly what what the purpose of this is.
I kind of felt similar, and maybe I think part of it was just this was definitely the point where I was like, okay, let's wrap up this whole game, and I feel like even the sequence like was like 5 minutes too long. So I'm kind of in a similar boat, but that might also just be me being a cranky person more than like any actual feeling of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I know why it's in here. It's because the original game had a play, and they just wanted to blow it out and make it even bigger. Yeah, it was probably a little overdone. I am curious. So I think I know who everyone's date was, but just to clarify, my date was Tifa. Nate, you said yours was Red.
Yep.
And Garrison and Ryan did both of you have Aerith as your date?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So I'm pretty sure I know how this went for me, Garrison, and Ryan then. So the woman in the play would have been your date, Aerith for you two, and was Tifa for me. Did it just default to Aerith for you, Nate? Because I'm sure Red was not the princess.
That would have been way better,
Yeah.
but no, it just defaulted to Aerith.
Yeah, that's what I assumed. Okay. Yeah,
my counterpoint to any criticism of the play is we get Barrett in sick armor saying, "Pray take not another step, gentle princess." So,
I mean, that was pretty sweet. Barrett's armor, and I mean, Cloud's costume was kind of cool too. But like when Barrett came out in his armor and started talking like in Shakespearean or whatever, I was like, okay.
yeah, I'm on board.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd personally, for me, I don't know that I have really much else to mention through this whole Return to the Gold Saucer sequence. Yes, the play was expanded upon from the original. In the original, it was not Loveless, but that I remember. But otherwise, the main beats here are the same. You go back, you get the Keystone, you do some fights. Cait Sith swipes it, hands it to Shinra, all of that stuff. You go on a date. Like, I don't know that I have really anything interesting to bring up here. Does anyone else before we move on?
Just real quick, I'm curious. Did you guys watch the scenes of like the gondola scene with all the characters?
I did like the date with different characters.
Yeah, with all the different date options.
I really want to watch the option that is the boys' night out.
Yeah, I was gonna say if y'all haven't,
I meant to do that and I haven't.
I should do that. I should definitely do that.
Yeah, there's definitely just a video out there of like all the dates, and like they're all interesting. Like I already talked about most of the interesting points. Like Red talks about how they could see the future. Aerith and Tifa both make it clear that they are lying to Cloud. Like, there's interesting stuff in each of them.
What was Barrett's? Was there anything interesting there?
Barrett's was like him kind of talking about Myrna, his deceased wife, and like the nature of relationships, and like getting kind of deep about that stuff with Cloud. And then he like asks Cloud who his soulmate is, and they have like a bro moment.
I should watch that. Was the boys' night out with Vincent, Sid, and Cait Sith absolute mayhem?
It was pretty funny, yeah. Yeah, so if y'all don't know, one of the options is if you don't get anybody else on your date, then it's Cait Sith, Vincent, and Sid
Oh wow,
as a
That does
group.
sound amazing.
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, which when I was reading about that, the article I was reading was actually speculating that might not be possible on a first playthrough because
Yeah, I don't know.
Aerith's your points with Aerith, like it starts with Aerith by default. Aerith is the highest, then Tifa, then Yuffie. I think like there's a
Yeah.
not everyone starts equal, and if it might not even be possible to hit the boys' night because they're the lowest. So it might not
Yeah.
even be possible to hit that on a first playthrough. You might have to do some extra work to get it.
Yeah.
But
It's kind of funny though, because like Cait Sith's like, a Gold Saucer employee, so he's like trying to hype up everything, and like Sid kind of plays along a little bit, and then like Vincent and Cloud are just like brooding the whole time.
yeah, yeah. I meant to watch that one because when I learned about it, it sounded incredible. But
The Yuppie one was kind of funny too, although it's like all over the place. Like
I did watch that one. I watched a few of them. I did see
Yeah.
that one.
she talks about like how she used to have a crush on a soldier, which I wondered if that was supposed to be Zack, because Zack does like run into her in Crisis Core.
Yep, that was my interpretation.
And then she like very awkwardly gives Cloud a kiss on the cheek, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, I don't know." And then they like play fight, like air punch each other, and like it's very goofy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the date I remember being kind of a nice touch from the original game. So I am glad they included it. And the one with Aerith was very cute. Like,
Yeah.
They ride what do they call it? Basically the big Ferris wheel together.
Yeah.
And she says, at first, I think she says something to the effect of, at first she kind of liked Cloud because he resembled Zack. But, now she would kind of wanted to be with him for the date.
Yeah.
I will say, go ahead, Garrison.
So my other comment for this chapter, I know we're running long, so I'll be quick. It's just that like this is the point where just like so many more mini games and things that Gold Saucer open up. So like maybe not tremendous. I think it's like one more side quest in each section. But this was the point where I'm like, I'm out. Like I cannot do this anymore. Like I'm just mainlining the story. And there's no penalty for not doing all this. So it's not like I think they shouldn't have done all the extra stuff. But that was the point where I was like, this is just more game than I could ever possibly want to play. Like I'm done. Mainline the story. Let's finish this.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yep. I did most of it. I did all the side quests. I did most of the rounds of the expanded tiers. Basically what did me in was more rounds in the Coliseum and more rounds in Chadley's Simulator, especially when you unlock the legendary and whatever the other tiers after you fight Gilgamesh. It's just like, I'm not doing all that combat. But there's one really funny side quest when you complete like the higher levels of all the Gold Saucer mini games. There's a side quest called Party Animal, and it's that Shinra suit guy, just regular working Shinra man. And he has apparently, and he pops up again. You've seen him a couple of times throughout the game, or maybe even in Remake as well. And he pops up again, and he has apparently earned the reputation as the ultimate party animal. So you have to you go around back to every mini game again, and you have to beat him at all of the mini games. And it is like it is also like the trippiest thing. He's like floating through the air and just like is just pure like like he is just this magical party man that you have to defeat in all the mini games. And it was very funny to me.
That's good.
And then when you finally complete it, he gets a phone call from work and he's like, "All right, playtime's over. I got to go back to work."
That's amazing. It also
Great.
just confirms to me that this game is just so excessive.
Yeah.
And Cloud and the Shinra employee share a bro moment at the end.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
The last comment I was going to say about the dates was it is completely unbelievable to me that all of these women would fall for Cloud, who is a brooding, borderline mute of a character and does not earn any of their affection.
Yeah. Yep. Accurate.
Anyway, moving on. Yeah, so at this point, I think we just tackle, because after this is when you go to the Temple of the Ancients. And really, the stuff that happens in the Temple of the Ancients wraps right into all of the ending stuff and the timeline. So I think we can just bundle all that together. A few comments. I think it's really interesting that they moved the location of the Temple of the Ancients. In the original game, it was in the south, like kind of in the ocean right off the coast of Fort Condor. It was on an island on its own.
Yeah.
I don't really have a really good thought of why they moved it to the northern continent. I don't really know why that change was made, but they completely relocated the Temple of the Ancients to where like the Bone Village used to be.
Yeah, my guess is that it was to move it to a place that was like far away from everywhere you have currently been, because it is kind of like goofy in the original game where like you suddenly have the tiny Bronco as like a makeshift boat and it's like, oh, the Temple of the Ancients was right here the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair. I mean, in some ways you're right, it probably does make more sense up north, both from that mechanical reason and also that's where a lot of the other ancient stuff was,
right.
like the city of the ancients or whatever it was called, the Forgotten City.
Forgotten Capital, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it kind of makes sense that all that would be in a similar place, but it did really stand out that they moved it entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And really the main thing I want to say about the Temple of the Ancients is it's just a really long dungeon.
Very long.
At least until the story stuff starts happening at the end. But I mean, you spend hours and hours just going through, just dungeon crawling, basically.
Yeah.
Until you get towards the end. Is there anything anyone wants to talk about the actual temple until we get to the little trauma dump flashback? Because I feel like that's when it starts the story stuff.
I mean, I think there's some cool stuff there. Like, I thought that, and this I'm gonna try to make this quick because I'm backtracking just a little bit, but like, I thought that this was one area of the game where I thought the Turks and Shinra actually seemed like competent, because they had like been keeping tabs on the party and where they were going and what they were doing, and found out where the keystone was, and were just kind of like waiting in the wings all this time. And then like, because they had a mole in the party, they were able to get the keystone and get to the temple first and like set up camp. And like that struck me a little bit, because in these kinds of games where you're like constantly clashing against the same enemy, a lot of times they can come off as like super incompetent. And I was like, oh, the Turks like actually are good at their jobs, and they like are an intelligence organization and like know what's going on and have more information than they let on, and they basically let the party do a lot of the work for them, which is kind of in the original, but I think it's better communicated here. And then I like the like visual of the temple constructing itself when the keystone is used, instead of it just being like a big temple with a door that's locked until you use the keystone. I thought that was a cooler way to handle this like very magical place. And my other note on that was that I thought it was a good change to have like a bunch of Shinra presence inside the temple, like troopers everywhere, and the Turks running around inside, because that made it feel like more dynamic, like there was more going on.
Also made the temple just feel huge.
It made it feel huge, and it made it feel dangerous because they could just like fling a bunch of troopers off of a cliff whenever they felt like it.
As you were talking about Turks and Shinra being more competent, I was like, well, except for the soldiers who really like fall into those gravity things to die comedic deaths.
Yeah, they're just, they're a small number on the budget. Like, who cares?
Yeah, I do. As you mentioned with the temple, kind of being constructed, I do think there were some striking visuals. You had like live stream kind of
hmm
like running around, and I think that's where you reverse gravity.
Yeah.
So they had some pretty cool visuals. And the other thing was this the section where they had the trials?
Yeah.
Each of the characters except for Cloud, because I guess he's maybe
'Cause he's
kind
not
of
a
doing
real
the
person.
Sephiroth thing.
Yeah, he's not a real person.
Yeah,
The
he
temple says
well,
you
and
don't achieve personhood status.
this was right around the point about that scene I mentioned earlier where they defeat the Turks and he basically like is about to kill Elena.
Yeah.
Which they're enemies and stuff, but it is still like unusually ruthless for this character to just like walk up and kill somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really hammer that Cloud is not in control of himself throughout the temple, and that he's kind of going off the deep end a little bit, which I think is a good thing to show, but I also regularly wanted the other party members to call him out more. Like they
Yes.
don't. He regularly does messed up stuff or says messed up things, and no one like bats an eye at it. They're just like, oh, okay, that's Cloud, I guess.
And I feel like, earlier in the game, Gungaga Reactor did a better job of like having the party react to him when he's acting like weirdly. And now he's acting like, I would say, even more dangerously. And like, we're at this point with this like super deadly materia kind of at stake here. And no one really does much. And I don't have a specific solution in mind. But I do wish that even if they had just paid lip service to the party being like, Cloud, maybe you should sit this one out, or like, doing something just to like make it clear, because the party interaction is such a great part of this game, and for it to fall apart like here as we're heading to the climax was really disappointing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Especially after the trials, and he's like, all right, let's go.
hmm
But yeah, I mean, and as we get and at the altar later. But yeah, so as for the trials, I don't know that I have a lot to say about these, but they are noteworthy, and we really get some pretty strong flashback scenes for each of the character of like really traumatic moments for them. I think this is the first time we ever see Barrett's wife is in this trial flashback.
Yeah.
Um,
I struggled a little bit with this section. Like, I don't mind getting the flashbacks for each character and like a specific moment that is like traumatic and important to them. But like, other than it being like a narrative device,
yeah,
I couldn't help but think like, why is this happening? Like, what purpose is this serving? Like, they're not actually being asked to do anything other than confront something bad. And I guess if that's all that it is, that's all that it is. But like, the temple is kind of portrayed as like this entity that's protecting the black materia, and like the trial you have to undergo to open the next door is just like relive bad memories. I don't understand what the point is supposed to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't really get it either. I will say that Aerith's trial was
Very sad.
very intense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a well done scene, and I think some of the others were well done scenes as well. But yeah, I agree with you. Is I don't know what the purpose of those trials were.
Right.
Um,
Other than to show us those scenes, which I understand, like narratively trying to get us to, see a little bit deeper into each character is meaningful, but like in universe, I don't understand what what I'm supposed to be understanding is happening there. And maybe I don't. Maybe there is no answer, and that's fine. But he just kept bothering me.
Yeah, I agree. And then at any point, I'm going a little quickly because of
Yeah,
time.
no,
But
that's fine.
at any point, if people have comments, feel free to jump in. But after this we go to the altar, and of course, Cloud goes full Sephiroth pilled and is, taking the black materia, even though Aerith tries to tell him not to, and it's kind of a little scuffle, and Cait Sith runs in and sacrifices himself to buy them a little more time, which also happened in the original in a slightly different way, but same kind of idea.
Yeah. And equally goofy that he just
yeah,
they have this big sacrificial moment and then he just shows up again outside.
Yeah.
It was goofy in the original and it's goofy here.
And I get what they're going for both in the original and here, which is he betrayed their trust to give Shinra the keystone, and then this is how he earns it back, is by sacrificing him one of his robot bodies. But
what did he really lose?
Yeah. That also didn't play well for me, is they play it like a big sacrifice, but he doesn't actually lose anything.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he says too, right? He's like, don't worry about this body or whatever.
Yeah.
He tells Barrett or something, so that the cast is kind of like, is he gone? Is he going to go, or is he dead? And he shows up.
Yeah.
I think it's also a problem that just carries over from the original game, but the whole sequence just feels so weird when it's like, I think they would have been better off if they just didn't go to the temple, or just let the Turks go to the temple and screw things up and everything collapse. The whole sequence is kind of forced in that video gamey way where it's you would have been better off not doing it, but we got to have that gameplay stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that given all the information, the party should have just left the black materia there. But narratively, I think it makes sense because Cloud is being driven to get the black materia by Sephiroth/Shinova.
That's fair. Good point.
Yeah, that was my main thought, is Cloud, I think, is going to make his way there one way or the other. I think, to your point, Garrison, I think it would, from the other party members' perspective, it would make more sense to make a case to not go there and leave the black materia protected, and they kind of don't have that conversation.
No, they don't at all.
Yeah, but I do think from Cloud's point of view, he is compelled to go there, and he's going to try and go there regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And he's always trying to make the argument that Sephiroth's going to go after it, and they need to get it first. And I guess you it's powerful material, right?
Yeah, but he's really being duped by Sephiroth, thinking he's chasing Sephiroth, but really Sephiroth is manipulating him to get the materia for him.
And I guess Sephiroth can't get it himself, and he needs Cloud or one of the puppets, one of the clones, to get it for him.
Yeah, that is something that I am still unclear on. I don't know. Sephiroth proper is at this point in the storyline not physically present.
In the original, I don't know about
in the original.
Our new timeline shenanigans.
And and I go back and forth a lot thinking about remake and rebirth. Where is Sephiroth actually present? Where is Sephiroth only seen by Cloud? Where is he manifesting in a way that is visible to everybody? It is super muddy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I was rewatching some scenes earlier today, and every time Sephiroth popped up, I was like, can only Cloud see him, or can everyone see him?
And and that's always the question.
Yeah. But Cloud does grab the black materia.
Mm-hmm.
One really curious thing to me, Aerith, after Cloud grabs it, and Cloud and Barrett are kind of scuffling over it, Aerith says it's a fake.
Yeah, this is so confusing to me.
I don't understand this. Is it actually a fake? Because she says it's a fake, but
think-
events later really hint that it's not a fake.
Well,
Yeah.
I think at that point they start getting into this whole like multiverse thing where it's like a key to where the real one is or something like that. So it's not actually the black materia, but it like opens up a pocket dimension. And I mean, at that point, like Sephiroth appears and like all this weird stuff starts happening and like all these like Zack starts flying around, right? I mean, that is where things um get strange, right? I think they're going for this. Like up until that point, I was kind of like on the theory that like, okay, Whispers change fate, so the events might play out differently. Well, the events do play out differently, right? At the end of the first game, Zack is not dead, and like, Jesse dies instead of whoever, and like,
Yes.
but then towards the end of the second game, it's like, oh, actually, no, there are multiple timelines, and you start seeing like, different copies of Cloud and Aerith, and like Zack like kind of shows up in the final battle. Like, I guess that was kind of the impression I got, is that they were going for this thing where like the live stream is kind of connecting these like multiple timelines almost.
Yeah.
And so it's like almost like being in the live stream for some of the characters, like Aerith ends up being this kind of like almost like a limbo, or like a sort of like a this weird in between worlds. But yeah, when she says the black materia is the fake, she says something about it being a key to the real one, and then Sephiroth appears and like it's like this dimensional portal or something starts happening.
Yeah, so you definitely hit on some things that I was gonna say too. Cloud picks it up. Aerith says it's a fake. After they kind of scuffle over it, eventually Sephiroth picks it up, and I have the quote here. He says, "This is the key, which grants access to the true counterpart hidden between worlds," which I think is referencing the white materia in Zack's world that is still white and not emptied like the one that's in their world. I don't know exactly why that's important to Sephiroth, but there's something there for sure of like, this wasn't his end goal. That piece of materia that they pick up off of the altar is not the end goal, but sets into motion the events that we see through the last chapter, with the white materia switching hands, the clear materia ending up with Cloud, and becoming, I think, corrupted to become maybe the true black materia that he will give to Sephiroth in part 3 at the Northern Crater, if that kind of follows the original game. So I definitely think there is something there. I don't fully understand why there's a fake black materia hidden away in the temple, or what the specific deal is with that. But yeah, Sephiroth's playing some kind of multi-dimensional shell game with the white, black, and clear materia here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if, as you're saying that, I wonder if between all the timelines there is only one true black and one true white.
Could be.
And maybe the fake one is like part of it, or something that's needed to reconstruct, or I don't know.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I agree that all that was not fully clear to me either. And I also think we're already getting into the timeline stuff, which is fine.
Yeah.
Tell me if you agree or disagree with this. to me, it seems like Sephiroth has a completely different end goal than he did in the original. Because in the original, he wanted to summon Meteor with the black materia to siphon power to become a god, basically.
Yeah, I think that end goal is still the same, but I think it
So-
extends beyond the singular world if you believe what Sephiroth says about the multiverse in this game, which I
And-
go back and forth about whether I believe him or not. Go ahead, Garrison.
And that's where I get really lost. So like I still am unclear about like there are potentially, possibly, probably multiple timelines, but we still don't really know. I feel like they kind of talk about what causes them or where they're from, but I feel like we still don't know the full story behind that, right? Like I was just at that point, the story was just losing me.
Yeah, so just a little bit of quick table setting. So yeah, they get the black materia, they go outside. Cloud still does hand it to Sephiroth. It happens in a slightly different way in the original, but yeah, there's kind of like a little bit of standoff where Aerith grabs it and kind of plays keep away for a little bit, and then there's kind of a little standoff between Cloud and Aerith, and the black materia ends up getting to Sephiroth anyway.
Yeah.
And Cloud and Aerith kind of fall into a weird dream state.
Yes.
But in all the ending stuff, yes, we do, in my read, very clearly have multiple timelines, and not just two. Like at least 4 or 5 are kind of covered, and we can kind of track them with the different stamps because we get, because then the dream date that Cloud and Aerith have, there's a different stamp. We see Zack like goes on this road in Midgar, and he's like debating which of 2 directions to go. One is towards Biggs, and one is going to help Cloud. I think is going to help someone else. And he very clearly goes towards Cloud, and then we get a later scene where he's with Biggs. So in this a different timeline where he's gone to Biggs, and Biggs is eating a bag of chips with stamp on it, and it's another stamp. And then later when Zack's sitting in front of the church and Johnny walks by for some reason, and then there's another bag of stamps, there's another stamp icon. So like in all these scenes we get different stamps. So in my read, it's very clearly 4 or 5 different timelines. And now I forget what Garrison said that led me down this path. But it like it is very hard to keep track of.
Yes. Intentionally so.
I think intentionally so. I think to some degree it also kind of doesn't always matter in a way. Like I think some of it's kind of throwaway. But that is where I did get lost on what Sephiroth's ultimate goal is, because he talks about. I started wondering, is the word reunion, because he he specifically says like a reunion of worlds. So in the original, they use the word reunion in the context of all the Sephiroth clones, for lack of better words, like all going to the Northern Crater and the Genova cells having a reunion, coming together, whatever. Like that's the terminology of reunion in the original. And have they completely recontextualized the use of the word reunion in this game? Like, is it?
Yes. Well, it's both. But yes, they definitely in the last section of this game lean heavily into it being a reunion of worlds. As much as it is a reunion of Genova.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's where I get a little lost on like what is Sephiroth's goal, because he wants to have this reunion of worlds for some reason, and I don't know for what reason. And to your point, maybe it is still in service of summoning Meteor, and maybe I just don't understand how this reunion of worlds is a step in that process.
I think the reunion of worlds is probably the way that Sephiroth gets the white or black or both materias into place that they need to be. I don't know the exact specifics of that, but it seems like that was the first step that had to happen. And then I do think the plan is still to summon Meteor and use that to basically siphon the life stream into a centralized location that he can then control. But it does seem like it goes like he thinks of it as bigger than just the physical singular planet. So I have a lot of quotes here. I'm not going to try to read them all, but they're talking about how the black materia will summon Meteor and destroy the planet. And Sephiroth says, "Yet I shall remain. I, son of Genova, will at last claim my birthright. My dominion shall reach into infinity. It shall encompass worlds unbound by fate, and histories unwritten." And Aerith says, "What do you mean?" And Sephiroth says, "My fragmented mother, these errant worlds, all shall be one again." So it really just feels like he is saying, I'm bringing everything together, and it's all going to be me at the end of my plan.
Right. So he's reunioning both the worlds and the Genovas across the worlds.
In a way, maybe. I'm not sure, but that's kind of my read.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to the group is anyone else just kind of rolling their eyes at this? Again, maybe I'm just being the cranky one, but and maybe we're also jumping ahead of the game toward kind of overall thoughts. But I just feel like, not that the original Sephiroth's goals were like perfectly coherent and not video gamey, but this is the point where I just like, I feel like this game it's just too much for me. Like I would have much more preferred like something more straightforward, but then it starts piling on all of the stuff with timelines. All these different Zack scenes we got in these final chapters, like, and then we haven't gotten to Aerith yet, but I think the Aerith moment too is that like it's starting to undercut, I think, some of the strength of the original game by like adding all these layers of just like currently at least very baffling like revelations to try to like surprise people. And I will fully admit that like part 3 might come and like might actually tell like a story that does loop around to becoming like coherent and like good and powerful. But in this particular moment, I just like found myself wishing that like, wow, I wish we were just getting a more straightforward retelling.
Yeah.
Or even if we could just get back to like remakes, like there are whispers trying to keep things happening the same instead of like all of a sudden we now have like 5 different timelines and like 3 different Zacks running around and like white materia and clear materia and everything.
Yeah. I don't disagree at all. Like when I played the end sequence myself, like it was too much. It was too overwhelming. It was too confusing. And I definitely felt like it severely undercut a lot of the big moments that were successful in the original game and in this game didn't work. I went back before we are recording this and like rewatched all the major cutscenes of the game and like tried to pay close attention. And in this last sequence, I feel like I was able to get a better handle on what they were going for, but I don't think that excuses the fact that it feels extremely convoluted and messy. Like, and I think that's intentional. Like, I don't think it works as I play this game through and see the ending and feel satisfied. I just don't. I fundamentally don't think it works.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of felt that way about the first game.
Yeah, and a lot of people did feel that way about the first game too.
I agree that I did. I mean, I tried not to think too hard about this game anyway, but But yeah, like it was a lot going on, and there was this kind of big cinematic ending, which, like you said, I didn't really. It felt maybe a bit unnecessary, a bit too much.
Yeah.
And then, like, I guess I didn't think about it too hard, but yeah, it was very much a twist, I guess, with like, oh, we're trying to change Fate or the original timeline to now we've got a multiverse and a bunch of timelines. So I guess I mean I guess I'm curious to see what they do with it, but it is kind of confusing. It's hard to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah, I agree that I came away from this ending not very satisfied at all, and kind of felt like they're just doing weird timeline stuff for timeline's sake. Like, you could have ripped Zach out of all of this and it would not have made a difference.
Yes.
Like, why was so much attention given to Zach? And I feel like that extends to a lot of other things that happen, is like a lot of it feels kind of needless, and then like they did it just for the sake of having kind of zany, flashy stuff happening. And I agree with Ryan that I've felt similarly coming out of the end of Remake. And I remember us saying in our Remake podcast that, yeah, like a little tepid about the ending, and it's gonna, in a weird way, be on future parts, is gonna like retroactively affect how I think about Remake. And I think what was extra deflating for me at the end of Rebirth is kind of feeling the exact same way again.
Yes.
And I finished Rebirth saying like, ugh, well, it's kind of dependent on what they do in part 3 to justify all of this timeline nonsense in part 2, which also will justify what happened in part 1. And it's like, none of these parts on their own are feeling satisfying to me. And
Yeah.
And
it's a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me type of thing, where now I do not expect them to make it worth it. Like,
and so I do want to circle back to the AR at the moment, because I do think that's important to talk about. But part of what I felt, and so I played Remake for the first time at the end of last year, so about 5 months ago now, and I almost feel like the ways in which Rebirth's plot is so weird and off the walls is also just like off the walls in a totally different direction than Remakes was, because Remakes all this stuff about whispers and like, can you change fate? And like, there's a lot of dialogue in Rebirth about like, can you change fate? But the whispers, not really a big player. Like, you don't even see them till I think like chapter 9 in Gongaga. And like, the plot is, for the most part, just following along the original game's plot, but expanded until we get to the final act here. But I just feel like, Remake, we're fighting whispers, we are just fighting fate. Rebirth is like, well, actually, whispers aren't really the big deal right now. It's actually just like, there are a billion timelines. And I feel like there's not enough of a through line between these two games to make me invested in what part 3 is, beyond like hoping that they like actually make some sense of it. And that's not what I was hoping for from this game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Apart from just feeling like confused and overwhelmed by the ending, my biggest takeaway immediately finishing this game was like, they did not successfully like perform the role of a like part 2 of a trilogy, which is like to set up the stakes for the finale and like make it clear what was going on leading up to that point. Because I feel like in terms of like the mysteries around, all of us who played the original Final Fantasy understand the mystery around Cloud's identity and memories. So I feel like you have to kind of put that aside, because these games are not chiefly interested in that, even though they're a part of it. But the main mysteries that they introduce around whispers and fate and multiverse shenanigans and what's going on with the black materia, the white materia, with what did Aerith know, what is Sephiroth's goal, like none of that stuff, that part of the storyline changes from the beginning of Rebirth to the end of Rebirth. And like that part is super frustrating to me.
Yeah, I agree, because like the thing I was most interested to see was honestly like what Aerith's role, like, because it was clear in remake she knew stuff,
right?
And to your point, none of that really gets expanded upon in Rebirth, and I think it would have been interesting, like if they're going to lean into this multiverse, multiple timeline, whatever, like have some actual development of like what did Aerith know? How did she know what she know? Has this Aerith been from a different timeline the whole time? Like kind of like actually putting some answers to that. I think both remake and Rebirth have done a lot of like posing questions and creating mysteries, and I think neither of them have done a good job at answering the mysteries in any satisfying way. I also think both of them have, for the most part, until the ending of both games, followed the main Final Fantasy VII beats, and they've hit most of the key moments, not all, but most of the key moments with some stuff sprinkled in. You know, Remake had the Whisper stuff segments. Rebirth had the Zack segments, which were the main segments that hinted at different timelines. So it's like they each sprinkled stuff in along the way that was confusing, but they still hit the main Final Fantasy VII timeline, or like plot points. And my main prediction for part 3 is they're going to do the exact same thing again. Is they're just going to hit the same Final Fantasy VII beats until the ending, and then something weird will happen at the end that may or may not justify everything that's happened across this entire remake trilogy. I have less faith now that it will that it will be satisfying than I did before playing Rebirth. But I think it's just going to be the same pattern again, which is pretty disappointing to me.
I guess I did want to say maybe we should talk about like what happens to Aerith.
Right.
Since you mentioned that it seems like the story is kind of in a way like following the plot of the original series or the original game, and that was one of the biggest inflection points and one of the biggest question marks about like what changing fate might mean. I feel like, at least. And
I mean,
not really sure what happens. But I guess
I mean, to your point, so much of the marketing and the hype and just everything about how Rebirth was presented is once we knew it was going to end at the moment where Aerith died in the original, and remake part 1 ended with the idea that we could change fate, and they even foreshadowed the fact that Aerith's fate could change. Like, in a lot of ways, Rebirth was built around the entire idea that Aerith's fate could change, and there are so many moments hinting at, when the moment comes, will you be ready, or what's going to happen, or like Aerith seemed to know her fate. And then to your point, Ryan, they get to the actual moment. We get to the moment that this entire game has been built for. We've been playing 100 hours, and like all the hype about Rebirth has been about what's going to happen to Aerith. Like if before Rebirth came out, if you had surveyed people, what's your main question for Rebirth? It would be, what happens to Aerith? That's what everyone wanted to know. So this entire game has been about, and we finally get to that moment, and it's a mess.
And they can't answer the question.
Well, so here's the thing about the multiple timelines. It is simultaneously confusing, and I also think it is simultaneously pretty straightforward. In the Prime timeline, Aerith dies just like she did in the original. Nothing changes there. But because there are multiple timelines, in some of the timelines, Aerith lives. And we have multiple timelines, which creates a situation where in any timeline things can be different. So they could pull different outcomes from different timelines. You know, one of the timelines Biggs lived one time, you know, the main timeline he died. The main timeline has followed the original Final Fantasy VII all the way through, including Aerith is dead.
Yes.
They bring in multiple timelines, and all of that. If you try and get into the particulars of how all that works and what happens in each timeline, it's very confusing and almost impossible to keep track of. And I've basically taken a step back and said, I don't care what happens in the timelines, all the other timelines. They're going to use that as a plot device to just, I don't know, do whatever they want to do. It's going to be a very convenient thing for them to pull from a timeline to show a cool scene if they want to show a cool scene that they can't do in the main timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I view it, for better or worse. And the answer to did Aerith die? The answer is yes and no. Depends on what timeline.
Yep.
And I don't know. It's just like it is a mess, and like that scene didn't hit in any way because Sephiroth comes down and you immediately flip timelines because he comes down and Cloud saves Aerith, and I didn't even realize we had jumped to a different timeline at that point.
Right.
And then it flips and shows Aerith dead, and that's actually the prime timeline. So like even that moment is just confusing unnecessarily.
It's so confusing, and they build that moment up so much, like you said, and then it seems like they made the decision. Oh, Cloud snaps out of it at the last moment and saves Aerith, but then they just immediately start making it confusing by swapping timelines or worlds or sequence of events or whatever you want to call it to show that, oh no, actually in this version she didn't die, but there's a possible version out there where she definitely did. And you know, the characters other than Cloud are all acting and operating as if she definitely died. They're grieving, and Cloud is both like emotionless about it. Well, he's very emotional about it, and then he's emotionless about it after the fact. And there's a lot of flipping back and forth between different versions of Cloud in that moment. Even Tifa at one point like sees both versions, I'm pretty sure, from like scrubbing back and forth through that. Like it's so confusing. It's so messy.
Yeah. Because I think Cloud understands there's multiple timelines at this point. By
I don't
the
know
end,
if Cloud understands anything.
fair. He understands that Aerith is kind of alive in some weird way.
Yeah.
Well, and he presumably sees her and hears her or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
They're
Like
talking in the last scene of the game. Like they're talking to
everyone,
each other.
everyone is crying. Like you don't see him drop her body, or
Yeah.
you see him. Like it looks like it's a different, like it's a flash from the like almost like a memory from the original game, but you don't see him like lowering her body into the water. But they're all sitting beside the water, and like everyone but him is like broken up and crying as though it happened.
Yeah.
And so it is very unclear if like it seems like to everyone else but Cloud, she died in some fashion, I guess akin to the original game.
Yeah, that's my read, is that to everyone but Cloud, they saw events unfold as they unfolded in the original game.
Right.
And the reason I ask is, does Cloud understand there's multiple timelines is because the way the sky. So like,
yes,
when Aerith and Cloud went on their weird dream date after they fell at the Temple of the Ancients, and Aerith says, "Don't look at the sky."
Yeah.
And of course, the first thing Cloud does is look at the sky, but you get the weird like distorted sky rip or whatever, and like it seems, and through all of that stuff, and Cloud also sees that in the very last scene of the game as well. He looks up and sees it, and other people look up and they don't see it.
Correct.
So it seems to me like even if he doesn't understand explicitly what's happening, he kind of would have some kind of notion that, I don't know, something's going on there.
Mhm.
But I don't know that anyone else does, and I don't know if Aerith would have conveyed that to Tifa or anyone else, because I mean, Aerith clearly knew there was timeline stuff going on, and Zack is the other character who might, but I also think Zack, which I appreciate this about Zack, I think he just like pops up in places and he doesn't actually think about it much, but he just jumps into action anyway. He's like, he's just the ultimate go with the flow guy. But anyway, what were you about to say, Garrison?
I think, like, to me too, the broader question is like, to what end is any of this? Like, obviously, like Aerith's death, probably one of the most iconic scenes, like in video games. Like everyone knows it. But even like heading into that moment in this game, like I was prepared for an emotional gut punch. Like even knowing like that she was probably gonna die, or assuming she was gonna die, like these two like remake and rebirth did such a good job of like building out her character and building out like this cast in a way that the original just didn't. That it was still like, even if it played out exactly like the original, it would have been a really powerful, really striking moment. And it was undercut that just to serve fusion. And my current expectation, and I will note that I'm like pretty much batting zero for predictions about how things will go, is that like in part 3, Cloud will fall into the live stream and he'll reconstruct his memories, and we'll probably see like the full on like Aerith gets stabbed scene. But I also think it's gonna be like, it's not gonna be effective seeing it there, I don't think. And that's really frustrating because they could have had a really powerful, great moment. Or perhaps I think they could have gone fully into the ambiguity side of things, but instead they tried to like have their cake and eat it too. And I think they failed at making either of those an interesting choice. And that ended up being like my ultimate takeaway from the game, is that like they had an opportunity and it just seems like they blew it.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree as well. And I said the same thing in our remake podcast of they're trying to hit all the main beats and then do this other, crazier, more confusing stuff. And I don't, kind of what you just said, Garrison, I think you got to pick a lane. You got to do one or the other, and trying to do both is, I don't know that's working.
Yeah, I guess on that note, I do think it's maybe worth mentioning that there are some things that they've done that I think might, it might work in the context of like the fact that everybody kind of knows what's coming. So like we talked about, they cast doubts towards Tifa. I thought that was maybe kind of clever because it was actually effective, and it's like, oh, is this game going to do something different? Like, is it going to, even if it didn't, like it's still a bit of misdirection that kind of is like, I don't remember this from the original, and it does make me question like exactly what's going on in a way that makes sense in context. But yeah, the weirdness stuff is just really hard for me to follow. Like I can still kind of enjoy parts of the story, like going along for the ride, but whenever, whispers start showing up and multiverses start happening and things like that, it's like it becomes really hard to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there is potentially a version of this ending which just instead fully veers into the ambiguity of it all and says like, we really don't know if Aerith died or if it is completely hallucinating things. I don't think that would have been as satisfying as just being straightforward, but I think that would have at least worked within the narrative that this story is telling, of like Cloud is someone who is just really broken, his mind is really broken, I think it could have been interesting to play with it that way too, but instead it's like, no, it's clear that she's like mostly dead, or at least dead in like, our Aerith is dead, but also it's ambiguous. And again, neither one worked. I really do think like either option would have been fine, but instead they chose the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a messy ending, and my main prediction for part 3 is they will continue to try and have their cake and eat it too, so to speak.
Yeah.
They will hit all the main moments, but there will be an air of timeline stuff going on that may not feel like it has any real purpose. I think there's interesting stuff they could have played with the knowledge Aerith knew about trying to change the outcome of the original Final Fantasy VII. I still don't really know if we've seen the full Sephiroth yet, how he's working. Like, there's a lot of interesting stuff they could have done with him that I feel like they haven't done yet, and they may never do. But I do feel like there was some potential coming out of the ending of Remake, and to what Nate said earlier, Rebirth did not advance any of that, and I don't know if they will. We don't really have time to do full predictions. So the only prediction question I'll ask is, do you think, so in the main timeline, Aerith is dead? Do you think at the end of part 3, Aerith will still be dead in the main timeline?
My prediction is yes, just because I think their inclination is to go as close in eventual outcome to the original game as possible. I think that she will play a part in the game through Cloud's visions of her and through her work in the live stream of summoning Holy, or whatever that looks like in the third part, to stop Meteor. I like Garrison's prediction that we get the reconstruction of what actually happened in the Forgotten Capital with Aerith, and see it more realized. I don't know that will really work. My one off the wall prediction that I don't think they would actually do this because it's straying too far would be that when Cloud pieces together his memory of that moment, that he realizes he was actually fully taken control of by Sephiroth, and he was the one to kill Aerith, and then she has to forgive him through her communication with him through the live stream for him to move on. And I think that could be interesting, but I don't know if they're willing to really go that far and say that oh yeah, Cloud murdered his potential love interest and then she'll forgive him for that.
I think that would be an interesting twist to go, but I agree with you, they probably won't.
J.J. Abrams presents Final Fantasy VII Reunion.
Yeah, so we've obviously gone very long here, and I think all of us have kind of hinted at how we felt about this game overall. But I do want to give everyone a quick chance before we wrap up. What were your kind of final impressions of this game? And kind of a side question is, I don't know how to word this in any way other than the blunt way, but at this moment of where we are in this Final Fantasy VII Remake project, do you feel like splitting it across 3 parts was the right choice?
I did want to jump in real quick.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you were talking about predictions. I think one thing worth mentioning there is that I think there was a developer comment that said they had tweaked some events to line up better with Advent Children. And in Advent Children, spoilers, I guess, but Cloud is suffering from degradation, and I think eventually it's Aerith working through the live stream kind of reverses is able to reverse some of those effects. Something along those lines happens in Advent Children. So I would that might factor into predictions. But anyway, you were asking about overall impressions and do I think it should this should have been 3 games. Overall impressions, I think this game was too much. We talked about it, I think, a bit. In the first half, in our first podcast we did, it was a bit less negative. We felt like there were maybe too many mini games, but you could kind of pace the story and then do the open world separately, or at least that's how I felt. But then you get into like these force mini games and the gold saucer, and like in the second part of the gold saucer, and the Cait Sith sections, and so I think there's just too much content, and like the pacing didn't work that well. I do think the open world thing could have worked, like as like a break from the linear sections. It's like you can choose to engage with the side content, but there was just so much of it, and there was so much put into the main story and into other side quests, and a lot of it was good and fun and silly, but there was just way too much of it. And then some of the ending and the weird parts didn't work as well for me. Although it still does a lot of the cool Final Fantasy VII remake stuff of like the character development is great, the cinematics are great, like the core story has a lot of really cool and interesting stuff going on. Do I think they should have broken it into 3 parts? I still think that's valid. I do think this part was too long. Like if they had cut out maybe somewhere between 20 and 40% of the content and made it a bit more streamlined. The first game was what? Maybe half the size of this game, and it was pretty solid. So I still think a 3-part thing is fine. They have a lot more cinema, a lot more story. The side quests are fleshed out, the environments are fleshed out. It's just that I think this game might have fumbled a bit at parts.
Yeah. What about you, Garrison?
I do want to return to some positives, because I do think that there's a lot of stuff this game did really well. I do think the combat was great. I think a lot of the open world stuff was great. I think, like Ryan said, there's just too much of everything. But it was a game I had a lot of fun with. And it is frustrating that it does end on a pretty sour note, at least for me, with just all the plot stuff. Which did kind of end up being my takeaway, is that wow, I really wish that ending had been different, better, whatever the word might be. But it was a good game, and I am not looking forward to part 3 in terms of plot, but I am looking forward to part 3 just in terms of seeing what they do, and I will be excited to go back to the combat in this series after I've had a nice break from all the hours that I've taken here. Do you also want to shout out, again, in a game of excess, the final boss gauntlet was I did like how the very final phase ended up being Cloud and Aerith, which again I think was undercut by all the ambiguity regarding Aerith. Because it could have been a really powerful final farewell to have that fight with it and then go back and then she's dead. But again, they went with ambiguity, and I think that undercuts it. But I did want to shout out, I did think that was still pretty cool the way that final part of the final boss fight turned out. As far as the question of whether they should have split it across 3 parts, I do think trying to do all of Final Fantasy VII in one game probably wouldn't have made for a satisfying product just with modern game development and cost and the scale of this game. I think that would have been tough. I think what I would have liked was the 3-part version of Final Fantasy VII that's just like the expanded storytelling and not this convoluted whispers and timeline stuff.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And I know what you're most excited about in part 3 is all the chocobo breeding.
If I can't get a gold chocobo, then this whole project was for nothing. But I think if we learned anything from this game, it's that literally every single system and thing from Final Fantasy VII Original is going to make it. So you can bet there's going to be like a 30-hour chocobo breeding experience.
Oh, yeah. It'll be there.
Get ready to fight all 13 Knights of the Round in a boss fight gauntlet to earn that materia.
And then Chadley.
Oh god, we didn't even talk about Chadley, did we? Anyway,
Yeah,
we talked about him last time.
We did talk about him some last time, but yeah, we somehow went this entire podcast without mentioning Chadley's name until just now. Yeah. Nate, what about you?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. A lot of what we've already said stands for me. I do really like these games. I like playing them. I get frustrated with the confusing, like intentionally confusing meta aspects of it sometimes. But it's also so ridiculous and stupid that I can't help but like think it's kind of entertaining. So I'm ready to see what they do with part 3. I'm ready to either see them like find a way to make this all land in a satisfying way, or to see it crash and burn horribly and kind of laugh at it. Like either way, it'll be kind of entertaining to see.
I really want to go to bed soon, but I do want to toss out a really quick question to everyone. I know I want to hear Justin's final thoughts, but it currently seems like Rebirth has underperformed sales-wise and not met Square Enix's expectations. So I'm curious, just in terms of like presentation, do you think part 3 will be as big as part 2, or do you think it's going to have a reduced budget and be a smaller experience to try to be a more profitable game?
My non-answer to that would be that I think it can be just as big as Rebirth on a smaller budget, because they've already created so much of this world and so many assets that they could probably just churn out a game of the same size a lot quicker.
Yeah. And there's been some comments floating around to that as well. But yeah, my gut, and I don't have any real basis for this, my gut is that all of the plans for part 3 were already set in motion before they had sales for part 2. And I think they're going to see this through regardless. I don't think Rebirth sales are really going to change anything personally. That's my gut. Yeah, my final thoughts, I pretty much all said it all as well. Yeah, to Garrison's point, I think there are a lot of positives, and I did like the game overall. I actually, despite it being too much, I did appreciate the open world segments. I liked bouncing around and seeing those areas of this iconic game like kind of blown up in that way and being able to roam around in them. And I think I like having a mix of open world and more linear dungeon sections instead of all dungeon, which Remake was. I do think there's a lot of pacing problems. I do think there's too much bloat. There's just too much of it across the board. I would have much preferred a shorter game. All of that stuff for sure. But I did enjoy a lot of the things we've talked about, enjoying the combat, a lot of the story moments, the characters, all of that stuff. The ending definitely left me deflated. It left me deflated in a lot of the ways. I actually came away from Remake with a lot of the same frustrations. I think them doing what I view as basically the same thing twice in a row makes it worse. And leaves me less optimistic about part 3. We'll see what they do, but yeah, I think it's just having that kind of messy ending twice in a row is, I don't know, doesn't feel good to do it again. I would be curious what it would look like if they had done 2 games instead of 3, because I agree with Garrison that fitting it in 1 is probably too much to ask, but kind of one of those, like, why does everything need to be a trilogy moment, where if this was 2 games, they could have ended the first one with the mystery questions and then answered it in the second game instead of having to have 2 games ending in mystery. And I think that may have solved some of the issue of us feeling deflated by having the same kind of ending again. So that's kind of my take. Is right now I'm not feeling 3 games are worth it. We'll see if part 3 convinces me otherwise. But I did like the game overall. And I am on board, as Nate said, to see how this all wraps up for better or worse. And this has been a long podcast, y'all. And I know some of us are well past their bedtimes.
Yep.
So, and there's a lot more we could have talked about.
Yep. There's plenty left on the cutting room floor, but you know what? With the game this size, apparently splitting it in 2 still doesn't quite.
Yep. Just like the game itself, the ending to this podcast was messy.
Yeah.
But hopefully that was a good discussion and y'all enjoyed it. I certainly did. But yes, we're going to wrap up this podcast here. That has been our final discussion of Final Fantasy, on podcast form at least, of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I've been Flex, joined by Nate, Ryan, and Garrison. And thank you, anyone, for listening. We will be back next time with another episode of the ATACS podcast.